this is going to be a focus on two different arguments in a way. One of them is the detection of an interstellar object. I would say that's the more conservative conclusion from my work. And then we will also tackle the more ambitious, perhaps, conclusion, which is the possibility that we are dealing with something more extraordinary. And that is, potentially a techno-signature. Now, we're going to very quickly come on to a particular class of objects called tektites. You can see one example here, and I'll give you some. We'll be tackling a few more. Now, we're going to leap back into the deep past. So this is around about 788,000 years ago, and our early ancestors, probably Homo erectus, perhaps some other yet to be named hominin, witnessed something extraordinary. They saw the sky on fire, something exploded, and they witnessed the sky on fire. And one particular group of these hominins we now suspect, also saw the sky, not only on fire, but also the land on fire. And they were attracted to this, this spectacular event and headed in the direction of these flames. Now, how do we know this? We know this because at a site in China, they found hand axes in the same geological layers as tektites. And we'll see what tektites are, but they're essentially a glassy type of material, unlike modern glasses we use. They have a lot of differences to that, which we'll come to. They are somewhat similar to volcanic glasses, but are also unlike those. We know they have a cosmic connection. So they stumbled on this site, and they may have handled some of these objects. They may have utilized them, but certainly we can imagine they would have found them to be quite extraordinary, because these are unlike anything they would have encountered before. They would have found this black glass, strewn around, some of it with quite spectacular shapes that look like they are engineered. And we could imagine them wondering if these were not somehow gifts, from some sky gods, or some kind of extraordinary paranormal event. These people remind me, this event kind of reminds me of something, because you can almost imagine this, these early hominin ancestors wandering into this clearing and seeing this strange, seemingly sculpted black glass. And of course, that's so reminiscent of the scene from 2001, A Space Odyssey, of course, Kubrick and Clarke, and this encounter with this cosmic intelligence that is in the form of this black glass obelisk. Now, this parallel was certainly not lost on me, and it did make me wonder whether, perhaps Kubrick and Clarke either knew something or were channeling something, from the ether somehow, of this extraordinary prehistoric encounter between these early humans and this mysterious black glass. And I think that should give people some pause for thought, because it really is an extraordinary thought that this actually happened in a real sense. And when we come to the idea that this black glass may be remnants of alien technology, it's just such a spectacular synchronicity with the 2001: A Space Odyssey that it boggles my mind, to be honest. This material is found over an extraordinarily large area, as we can see here. This is the kind of up-to-date map of where the tektites have been found, and so as I note here, it stretches over an absolutely vast area. It goes all the way down from sort of southern China, where we counted those hand axes, all the way down to the tip of sort of northern Antarctica, which is around about 12,000 kilometers, and then out to the east and western edges of the field. You get to sort of Madagascar in the west, and out to Okinawa and stuff out to the east, again, about 10,000 kilometers. So this is an absolute massive debris field. There's just nothing else like it. Some of these, you can see these markers obviously found in the ocean. So this is where ocean core samples have been taken. And usually these result in what's called micro tektites. And these are tektite pieces of about a millimeter across or less. On the land, you've got a range of types of tektite. You've got some quite large chunks, in fact, kind of sheets that are found up in Laos and the surrounding parts of Indochina. And those are called muongnong tektites. These are essentially large pieces of kind of folded and swirled glass. They're quite unique in this strewn field. Some of these weigh up to sort of 25 kilos. That's obviously massive, really, in terms of if we are to believe this is kind of ejecta, which is one of the arguments for it, which the popular argument is this is impact ejecta. You then find that there are some quite large cannonball-like pieces, like actually spherical pieces that have rained down across the Philippines, and those can be around a kilo. And then if you go down further to Australia, you've got usually smaller pieces of debris, but some of those are still, several tens of grams, and quite impressive considering the idea that they supposedly have traveled from an impact somewhere in Indochina and been propelled through the air and flown all the way down there. So we're talking about some quite large pieces of material, and also some, absolutely tiny pieces. This debris field is understood to initiate somewhere in Indochina, and we know that the hottest, furthest flung piece is in Antarctica. So in other words, it's the direction of flight is down towards Antarctica. Now that's interesting for a couple of reasons, but one in particular, and that's because a few years ago, it was kind of covered that there had been some indications of strange anomalies down in Antarctica. And we can see here an article from The Guardian from 2004, where they realized that, using satellite mapping, that there is signs of what probably was a very significant impact down in Antarctica. And you can see they actually suggest that this may involve an object that is several miles across. And I think they point out here that it's on the scale of the impactor that is believed to have eradicated the dinosaurs 65 million years ago. So something on that scale. So they say 3 to 7 miles across, and that they suspect it broke up into around 5 pieces and impacted the ice in Antarctica, with the largest piece causing a kind of melted hole 200 miles by 200 miles. Now, that's an enormous strike, an absolutely enormous strike. So this is dated at being around about 780,000 years ago. So of course, we're back at that dating that we've got for this material and for what was found in these initial tektites. And so we have here a kind of a strange correlation, because as we've just said, this debris field stretches down to Antarctica. And by a coincidence, there seems to be enormous holes punched in the ice around the same time. Now, we'll sort of come back to that, but I suspect that we have a large explosion somewhere above Indochina. And again, we're going to clarify why I say above, while others say somewhere, on the surface of Indochina. But I believe there was an explosion in that area. That that is correct. The mainstream have it in some ways correct. That's roughly where it is, but I would say a lot higher above ground than they say. But that if this is a large object breaking up, and as this suggests, maybe into chunks, could it be that some of the very large pieces, they make their way to the end of the debris field and they go into the ice, and all the way along this path we have debris falling from the sky, and that's what this strewn field is. It's this decaying orbital path of this object fragmenting, and we'll dive more into that in a moment. But I want people to get that amazing possibility here first, that there may be large chunks of whatever this was still frozen in the ice in Antarctica. All right, so now, by a kind of strange twist of fate, one of the first scientific writings, in fact, the first scientific writing on australite tektites, I mean, not on tektites as a field, but on australite tektites, comes from Charles Darwin. And I find that, again, a nice overlap because, of course, I mean, we're going to be going a little bit into the story of humans and human origins, and we've already touched on this idea, of a possible link with the very early ancestors of humans and evolution. And so Charles Darwin, of course, absolutely, he comes to mind when we talk about evolution and early humans. And it turns out that he was one of the first people to write on this topic. He was given some of these tektites whilst visiting Australia, and we can see these are the samples that he took. So he's got what's called an australite tektite button, and these are a particular and a particularly odd type of tektite, because you can see this is sculpting. We have these button shapes, or rather like the front of a bullet or of a nose cone on a craft. right? And so he believed that these were a kind of volcanic glass that had been thrown out by a powerful volcano somewhere in Australia or Southeast Asia, and that this material had, been shaped by flying through the air. Now, he wasn't a million miles wrong. I mean, it certainly has been shaped by a flight through the air, but over the years, it was realized that this couldn't be from volcanic activity. And particularly if we go back to that, the size of this strewn field, there is no volcano that could propel material to such extensive, distances. So it was a reasonable kind of guess, but there's been a number of theories since then, and really the kind of the main ones that eventually were settled on as possible were the idea of either of an impact, an asteroid or comet impacting in Indochina, or of an impact somewhere on the moon that hit glassy material, probably in an extinct volcanic caldera, and propelled this material to Earth. So while his initial idea was, was a pretty good guess, it has since been debunked. The topic has remained mysterious. There'll be some people who say to you, oh, well, jumped on Google and it said, well, there was this impact and this material was, launched out and it, flew to these distances and rained down. And what's Bruce talking about? This is nonsense. But this, as you can see here, this is a paper pointing out this is an enduring mystery. They call it the enduring mystery of Australasian tektites, and for a very good reason. And that's because despite a pretty widespread acceptance by academics that this was probably an asteroid impact event, there's a lot of elements to the story that they cannot explain. So this remains as a topic with a lot of debate going on. There's literally hundreds of papers, some from geologists, some from chemists, some from physicists, some from space scientists that have all pitched in over the years, that couldn't resist this mystery and all hope to solve it and get to a final explanation of how we end up with this enormous debris field and the sculpting of these tektites into these clearly aerodynamic forms. And again, we can see another example here. And so this has attracted all kinds of minds, and obviously from Darwin to all sorts of people that have been fascinated by this. There's also a number of other tektite strewn fields I mentioned briefly here. We have one that's dated to just over 1 million years. It's over in the Bossum Twi site, and that's over in Africa and on the Ivory Coast. There's the what's called the Moldavites, which are found in Germany. They're probably the best known, a very distinctive green kind of crystal-like material. There are a lot of people wear Moldavite. You may have seen people with Moldavite jewelry. That's generally said to be about 15 million years old. There's another strewn field at Chesapeake Bay in the US, and that's 35.5 million years old. And at this point, there is some thinking there may be an additional strewn field in Central America that's not mentioned here, but that still isn't established, but it seems like there probably is another one there. And of course, we have the Australasian tektite strewn field dated to around about, the best dating at the moment is 788,000 years ago in the most recent redating of the material. So we have these 5 strewn fields. So they're mysterious for a number of reasons, but if you consider this, if they were from impacts, and we've had thousands and thousands of impacts, why is there only 4 strewn fields? So straight away, there's something different happening here. And that's acknowledged, widely, that this isn't typical glass that can be associated easily with asteroid impacts. And the reason for that is because when you have a comet or an asteroid or anything coming in, high velocity, hypervelocity, in fact, they impacts into the upper layers. And what would normally happen is you get a very rapid flash of, heat and pressure that melts, displaces a lot of rock, but melts a lot of the material. Some of it turns to vapor. A lot more of it is turned to melt glass. And of course, some of it is just left partially melted. And you'll find that in and around the crater. Normally, the debris can be displaced to around about 400 kilometers at the furthest. That's typical from a hypervelocity impact. And yet it's very clear that material is made from the crater rock. It's the same chemical composition, the same isotopic ratios. It's sort of indistinguishable other than being melted. It's chemically indistinguishable from the crater rock. So it's always been quite easy to confirm that the glass is from the crater and is from an impact. Now, that glass also has distinctive characteristics of being very quickly heated and then rapidly cooling. And that includes sort of a very foamy look to it. So you have a lot of bubbles in the glass, very obvious effects of quick melting and quick cooling. So you've got this foamy effect. You've got this kind of the inclusions of unmelted stone, partially melted stones, organic materials. And also you have quite a lot of water, in terms of you have the same amount of water that you'd find in surface rocks, which is, there's always water in the material. Tektites have very little water, particularly Australasian tektites have almost no water content, and that's very odd. Also, they have almost no bubbles. Their very chemical composition across the strewn field is very similar in different fragments. So they don't differ a lot across that vast, a massive strewn field. So they seem to be quite well mixed chemically. So these are all things that we see usually either with artificial glass or with volcanic glass. And volcanic glass has that effect because essentially it's being mixed in the caldera. So it's had an extended period of time where it is basically, it's been mixing away, bubbling away. So it's turned into a glass that's quite similar in some respects to our artificial glass because of that extended heating process. Now, those two, of course, we understand why the modern glass and why volcanic glass are like that. We also understand why impact glass is the way it is, but there's a mystery there as to tektites, because if they are from the same kind of process, an impact, flash event, then the glass should be similar to all other impact glasses, right? So instead, it's looking like they've had an extended period of heating and that they've had time to outgas and to become homogeneous and all of these things that we don't see in impact glasses. And that's why it's remained an enduring mystery, is because they have to be able to solve that. Now, the other side of it, you also have to be able to explain the distribution, this enormous strewn field. As I say, usually the limit for what they call distal ejecta, which is the most distant ejector from an impact site, is around about 400 kilometers. Now, as we saw, this strewn field stretches for like 10,000 kilometers across, 12,000 kilometers long. I mean, so clearly something else is happening here other than material being blasted out of a hole and flying through the air, right? So that can't explain it. And that is accepted by pretty much everyone at this point, that it is not simply the result of what they call ballistic transfer, that material exploding outwards, that it has to have traveled outside the atmosphere, right? So that's becomes really a set of sticky problems. And it's also why we come to the involvement of NASA and kind of rocket scientists, because they noted this unique shaping and thought, well, hang on a minute, this looks awfully like the nose cones of rockets and missiles, right? And so back in the 1950s, some of these early rocket scientists, they started to jump in on this problem and say, well, this has to be something to do with, entering the atmosphere. And so they ran a load of tests, and some of these were done at places like NASA Ames Research Center and other NASA facilities. And of course, this was the kind of the beginning days of the space program, and an interest in also developing missile defenses and all sorts of other stuff that were going on. But so there was a lot of focus on understanding the forces in the upper atmosphere for our objects that would be traveling through the upper atmosphere or in and out of space, right? So when they saw this, they kind of realized that there's some overlap here. And so these guys, they replicated the formation process of these australite buttons. And these are obviously one type of the tektites from the Australasian strewn field, and seem to be unique to the Australasian strewn field so far. They haven't been found for any of the other free strewn fields. So what they found is that when they replicate this in kind of wind tunnels and all the rest of it, that you come to this understanding that the initial object is a sphere, it's a glass sphere, right? And it has formed in a vacuum. And that's because they say, well, that's why you've got this really low water content. it's why you've got a sphere, because liquid glass, like any other liquid in space, right, will become a sphere, spherical, right? So it's due to surface tension and area of like least resistance. So you've got this kind of, you've got these spheres of glass, right? And so they know that they're coming, they formed in the vacuum, and then they're looking to see what angles would these need to come in at, so they don't just sort of burn up or, you know, the front edge melt, rather than turning into these unique shapes. And they found that it was almost horizontal to the plane of the Earth, so almost horizontal to the horizon. And so that was, again, it was quite extraordinary. And so they came to the conclusion that really this has to be coming in, not only is it coming in from space, but it's formed in space. And the parent, the larger parent, is most likely to be in orbit around Earth. And so when you start to list the possible targets from the view of these early scientists, at least, there's not a lot of options there. So they came to the conclusion that this was lunar material, right? And so to explain it, they felt it made the most sense that this was volcanic material, volcanic glass that formed in a volcano, and that then an asteroid had impacted the moon, had hit one of these, you know, large fields of volcanic glass, had melted it, launched it into space as kind of droplets, or perhaps as a larger chunk. And it then traveled towards the Earth, and then came in at this angle that was almost a glancing blow off the upper atmosphere. And it bounced along. And there's some evidence from the way the bubbles are stretched that this was initially kind of bouncing along at the edge of the atmosphere, these chunks, and that they then came in at these gentle angles. And there was time for heating to reshape the glass spheres into these aerodynamic forms, right? Now, if a meteorite comes in at normal angles, say 45 degrees or something, those come in obviously very fast and come in at these steeper angles. You get superheating, and the outside shell melts, but then evaporates. And so you just get those typical chunks of meteorites. Right? You don't see these shapes in meteorites for that reason. So they come in at steep angles, very fast, super hot. Outside just evaporates. There's no very little signs of melt because it's evaporation, and then the rock just falls to the ground, right? And that's what you find normally. So when you look at this, they know that for that secondary heating, you need these gentle angles, essentially orbital paths, like decaying orbital paths, inferring that the parent must be in orbit. Now, there's not a lot of things up there in orbit that we know of, or that were suspected to exist, that could explain that. And so if you think about it, so from the 1950s up until about 1970, there was a debate raging between the space scientists, particularly NASA guys, and the kind of the impact folks, mostly kind of geologists and stuff from universities around the world. And they were having this debate, you know, as to which model better explained the material. Now, on the one hand, the entry from space, you know, that explained a lot of it, you know, most of it. And on the other hand, the guys who were saying there was an impact, they could explain, you know, other anomalies and other aspects. But both sides were unable to come to a convincing conclusion, you know, where they explained everything and outcompeted the opposing team, so to speak, right? Then in 1970, there was kind of a knockout blow for the lunar hypothesis. And that was material that had been collected by the Apollo program, had been, you know, investigated, tested, and found to have a composition that just could not mesh with this australite tektite. That it was there was a lack of silica, which is important because these are about 70% plus silica. The lunar surface lacked silica, and just other chemical composition that just, you know, didn't match. And so they had to sort of concede that, well, this can't really be from the moon. And in fact, it's also volcanism on the moon had ended. We now believe, you know, certainly millions of years before this happened. So there would not really have been any volcanic activity 780 or 1,000 years ago that would have meshed with this. Okay, so they really kind of had to concede that they were wrong. But as they kind of departed the field, if you like, they threw back the gauntlet and said, well, you know, you've still got to explain all these anomalies, you know, that we've been able to kind of explain and that you haven't. So it's all well and good to say we're wrong, but that doesn't mean you're right. Yeah. And that's an important point, because today we have this kind of popular consensus that, you know, that they're right. And that's a problem because they haven't explained these anomalies. And go go to the next one, that, you know, basically they have to really come up with an exotic hypothesis for this distribution pattern that we're seeing. Now, the easiest way of explaining it is, as the NASA guy said, is that we have an object, something is up, you know, something up there orbiting Earth, not the moon, but there's something up there orbiting Earth that is broken apart, you know, and that is not originating from the moon either. It's not directly from the moon, can't be made of lunar rock, you know, so we know it's not that, but there is something that has entered the orbit of the Earth, originating from space, that is broken up, and that we are seeing this distribution because it's, you know, it's a fragmenting object with its debris still in orbit, coming down, you know, across this sort of suddenly moving debris field, depositing material as it decays, right, until this final ending of this debris path down in Antarctica. I mean, that meshes very well. But if you were to try and explain it as an impact, you have to come to these really exotic hypotheses. I'll give an example. There's the current one, the best one I think that they've come up with, is the idea that somehow an object coming in, perhaps a comet, has come in, you know, very large, has to be quite large to explain this. It's like 10 trillion tons of debris so far that is calculated, so enormous amounts of this glass has come in, and it's punched a hole in the atmosphere and is now created a kind of a vacuum chamber over Indochina, and that then as it hits the ground, it, you know, creates this glass, and this glass flies through this vacuum hole, which has to be hundreds of kilometers across. And then this material flies through the vacuum hole and then out into space. And then it somehow is coming down across this massive area. It's coming back in and it's raining down all along this path down to Antarctica. There's a few problems with that. The first thing is that for an object to even possibly do something, first of all, you can't really displace the amount of air they're talking about, but even if it does punch a hole, and let's say some of the material gets out, you're talking about something on the scale again of the impactor that caused the eradication of the dinosaurs. Imagine the crater, because, you know, if you look at the crater associated with the K2 boundary, it's like 100 kilometers across, what's that, 100 miles across, I think. It's like, it's enormous, right? And it's very visible. It's 65 million years old, yet you can see it. You know, you can see it, you can still see the shape visually, but you can also detect the entire anomaly using our satellites. It's well mapped. So if you can see that after 65 million years, how much easier would it be to see one that's only 788,000 years old, right? And yet they have not found this crater. They've scoured, you know, Southeast Asia for it, and they have not found a crater that meshes with the expectations. You know, again, would have to be vast, even to begin. I think one scientist said about the size of Ireland, he would expect it to be. Now, that's problematic. So if you're going to say there's this giant impact and it does all this amazing, you know, I would say it was breaking the laws of physics almost there, because you've got to displace an enormous amount of air. We assume killing everything anywhere near it. I mean, in a vast area. Again, so I mean, it'd be on the scale of the event that killed the dinosaurs. So on top of that, you know, so where's that signature? Where's the burn? Where's the dust in the air? Where's the nuclear winter? Where is the extinction of huge numbers of life forms across the planet? Where is the layer of iridium? Where is the dust layer, right? Because we know we've got one for that K2 boundary, right? So we've got iridium. So we know that there was an impactor, you know, they find this layer in clay all around the world and with ash above it and stuff, right? So it's a clear signature. With these, you find these micro tektites in core samples, but no dust. Hang on a minute. So you're saying there's an object, you know, coming in, making a crater, perhaps the size of Ireland, throwing material into space, displacing hundreds of miles of atmosphere, but it doesn't throw up any dust, right? Hang on a minute. You know, it borders into the nonsensical. This should be like a nuclear winter, you know, and we have that comparison. We know what kind of happened 65 million years ago, right? And so we should have very clear indications, certainly across Southeast Asia, you know, and also clear indications of a die-off, right? You'd expect a lot of kind of extinction-like level events kind of happening. There are a lot of species just vanishing from the fossil record and stuff, right? And again, not that long ago, so that this should be pretty clear evidence of it. No sign of that. And yet they want us to accept that somehow this enormous area of vacuum opens up and allows Joe to fly through it. And as one scientist pointed out, that even in that scenario, if somehow that happened, the melt glass is calculated to be traveling at around about 10 kilometers per second. So close to the speed that you need to exit the gravity of the planet, right? So it's around this sort of speed. It says, well, in that scenario, even if the initial area is vacuum, these pieces are going so fast, they will break through the edges of the shockwave very quickly and hit atmosphere again. And when they hit atmosphere, the pressure ahead of them soon causes them to fall from the air, right? And that's this problem of why we see impact glasses limited to around 400 kilometers. So for people that don't quite understand that, you can't just have material that just flies through the air for thousands of kilometers at hypervelocity speeds, because in the same way that when you see a bullet traveling through water, that force ahead of it, very soon you're compressing the water in such a way it will just stop the bullet dead, right? It equalizes the forces. The same thing happens with air, but it won't happen quite as fast. But when you're talking about these speeds, it's pretty quick that it reaches a point where the forces ahead and the friction acting on it and the gravity will cause it to just fall from the air. As I say, the maximum, I believe, is somewhere in the 400 to 1,000 kilometers. And again, I'm not certain they've got to 1,000. I've seen one paper that has suggested they get to as far as 1,000, and that's still nowhere near 10,000. So even in the extreme scenario, the furthest it would get is around 1,000 kilometers. So this does not add up. There is a glaring problem here, and people can peruse the academic literature on this and check for themselves. Obviously, I'm always happy to supply papers on these topics and see that this is accurate and that this is a very unconventional solution that's currently being offered, because once everyone's sort of gone down this route that it's an impact, all they can kind of do is bend the story to suit it in a way, and try to think of scenarios, exotic scenarios that enable what seems to be the impossible. And
yeah, sometimes in the mission to create the most rational explanation, you tear at enough threads, it becomes an extremely outrageous suggestion, even though you're trying to maintain some level of rationality. Oh, it could be this or this or this. You build enough stacks of those things together, it starts to become a very outlandish hypothesis.
Absolutely. And this is something that, normally academics are accusing independent researchers of, which, well, they're not saying it doesn't happen, of course it does, but they'll say, well, look, you're cherry picking the evidence, or you're desperately married to a theory, so you're just trying to stick on to anything you can, whatever bandages you can find, rather than saying, I think I'm wrong.
Yeah, we are all guilty of this, the human ego.
Yes, exactly. And so once people went down that path completely, and of course, because they discounted a lot of hypotheses previous to this. I mean, there was everything from antimatter falling down, melting glass asteroids passing through the atmosphere, ancient lost civilizations making glassy materials, as I say, volcanoes. There's quite a long list of hypotheses that were thrown at this problem. And as science does, it whittled them down until there was only the strongest contenders. But the problem is we also have a limit here, and that was the limit of the paradigm and the box that these people were in back in the 1950s and the 60s and the 70s, right? And in really up until not that long ago. And let's just say that box didn't tend to allow for exotic hypotheses that took you beyond the Earth-Moon system, right? So nobody had really gone far with the idea that perhaps this could come from further away. Now, it was touched on. There was a couple of different papers, again, from the NASA guys, who kind of did look at the idea, possibly, first of all, that the tektites themselves, as spheres, had come in from further away than the Earth-Moon system and had traveled from out in the solar system or even from interstellar space. the problem there was that there was a guy called Uri, who was a kind of, I think he was actually a Nobel Prize winner. And he realized that there was a number of initially, he actually kind of supported this, but then he realized a number of problems because, first of all, if you have a swarm of this material, it's going to get pulled apart by the gravity of the sun. So even if it was, you had fairly tight-knit swarm, as it passes in through the solar system towards us, it's getting acted upon. And he said it become very diffuse. He said, so by the time it reaches the Earth's surface, it's going to be raining down all over the planet. And some of it's going to go past us and just be circling out there in space, raining down sometimes and landing everywhere, on other planets, and that this stuff's just going to be out there, right? So he realized that that doesn't mesh with this debris field across Australasia because that's very tight. He said, well, for it to be focused in that way, he said this would have to be such a dense swarm that it would actually rain down meters deep across Australia. He says, he said this becomes a real problem. So it can't really be a swarm coming in from somewhere else. And on top of that, he found that the evidence from cosmic ray data, right, and anything flying around in the solar system or in space was hit by cosmic rays. Okay, so you can kind of calculate how long an object has been flying around in the solar system and when it formed and whatnot, right? And so they realized that this material had very little, almost no evidence of cosmic ray bombardment. So this again was constraining it. So its formation, they decided, couldn't have been from beyond the Earth-Moon system, right? So that was another kind of a death knell in any speculation that this swarm had come in from interstellar space. And I did read a guy who said, well, what if there, could it be that the parent body, that there was a large object that came in? But he doesn't really go far. He kind of says, well, yeah, but, almost what kind of object would that be? A big glassy meteorite from, interstellar space that explodes, somehow gets into orbit and explodes and never really goes further than that. You could almost imagine the cogs in his mind clicking and then just coming to a jammed bit where, well, there's no objects like that, right? So yeah, so that's case closed. Can't be anything like that, because what would that be, right? There's no natural objects we know of like that. So that's as far as I've ever seen any of the papers where they've gone down that road. It's just that you just see there was just the edges of someone, opening their mind that little bit more, that could it be something coming in from somewhere else? But what would that be? Other than that, the data sort of constrains its formation to the Earth-Moon system, right? So how do we kind of get around that issue? Well, if the parent body has traveled through cosmic space, through interstellar space, and so would have cosmic rays hitting it, but once it arrived here and it is either captured by Earth's gravity, which is problems for that, but or is in some way able to decelerate, which in that case, of course, would be not natural. In either of those scenarios, if it then something happens that causes it to superheat or explode, the glass is now liquid. So the formation of the glass is occurring in the Earth-Moon system. The cosmic ray data is gone because this is now being completely melted. It's a reformed, it's a new material. Now this material then rains down. And so this is indeed formed in the Earth-Moon system, but it doesn't tell you when it formed. It's a bit like with archaeology when we see a stone statue, right? How old's the stone statue? Well, the stone is 1 billion years old. How old's the statue? Well, the statue has been formed much more recently, by a human working it. And unless you have some way of dating when that was done, with some surrounding evidence, you would have to say, well, it's 1 billion years old, because you can't directly date the stone. So these are kind of problems where sometimes you have to understand a bigger picture view to understand what you're looking at, right? And this is one of those scenarios where you can understand that it's not necessarily as tightly constrained as you at first think. You say, well, it has to have formed here and fairly recently, but what about the parent? The parent can be much older and not have formed here. And that explains a lot of other elements to this, because if the parent body is glassy and is made of a homogeneous glass, right, with isotopic values, which in many cases are not in accord with the typical rocks that we would expect a body to impact with. So in other words, they're not like surface rock. if we have this kind of evidence, it's suggesting that this parent body is extraordinary, because there's no glass asteroids or comets that we know of, certainly not in our solar system, right? How did that form? How do you end up with this large object that's already glass? And we know it has to already be glass, because we've already tackled that you need a process to create homogeneous, refined, glass of this type. Usually it's artificial or it's volcanic. So something has to have happened to allow that glassy object to form. We also know it's enormous, because it's left us with something like 10 trillion tons of debris. I've seen calculations suggesting that as the tektites come in, they lose about 90% of their mass. So it was way bigger than that, right? So it's maybe 100 trillion ton object or more, right? So this is a vast glass moon, for want of a better term, orbiting the Earth, right? Which is just kind of mind-bending. So you start to get into this idea that this is something really spectacular. The other elements to this, you've got, there's materials in the composition as well that are, they can be found in the Earth's surface, but are very rare. And so some of them, are so rare that, as a few scientists pointed out, what's the chances that we get a kind of an extraordinary type of glass, which has come from a really unique event, and it just happens to involve something striking, rare surface materials? And he's like, well, and then in the other cases of the other tektite strewn fields, they also have some of these rare components. So in each of these 4 extraordinary rare events, the same material, rare material, would be hit. And so again, that's another aspect. The isotopic values, as we touched on briefly, there's a number of different isotopic values where they suggest something other than typical surface rock. So if there hasn't been an impact, then you can't explain that. If there's been an impact, they'll say, well, possibly during this heating event, there's been isotopic fractionalization and there's been changes in the ratios. But hang on a minute. So if this hasn't impacted the rock, it's not made of Earth rock, it's made of something from out there, it's broken up in orbit, then straight away you remove that whole argument. Instead, you see an object that is unlike asteroids and comets in our solar system, that has a different isotopic ratios, has a different chemical composition, and has far too much silica, because it's at least 70% or so silica, allegedly from melted quartz. And quartz forms in planet systems. It doesn't form in asteroids and comets, right? But even so, at 70% silica, that's way more than in any of the asteroids in the solar system. The maximum is 60%. So this is unlike anything we know out there, right? So straight away, you have to infer that this object is of interstellar origin, right? So why does that matter? Well, I mean, it's only in the last few years that we've come to understand that interstellar objects arrive in our solar system.
Yeah, Oumuamua.
Yeah, exactly. With the Oumuamua, it opened a door to acceptance that these interstellar objects, are out there and do visit our solar system. Before that, the box was smaller.
So this could potentially be a much earlier Oumuamua type situation.
Exactly, absolutely. And so this would be the if confirmed. If anyone doesn't manage to debunk all the different arguments that I've put, and I have a paper which is about done and is going to a respected scientist to review, who'll give me some feedback on what needs to be done with it. But if my argument is not readily dismissed and debunked, it would confirm that this is the first interstellar object, hundreds of thousands of years before Oumuamua, and of course would be in itself an astonishing and amazing discovery, because it would mean that I was the person who identified the first known interstellar object by date, not by discovery. Of course, we have Oumuamua has already been discovered. And since then, we've had 2 more. We've had Comet Borisov, which passed through the solar system. It was about a couple of years later. And then just in the last few months, there's a report of the conclusion that an asteroid that impacted near Papua New Guinea, actually it broke up, they think, in the air and showered into the ocean. But they think that this asteroid was, or meteorite, it's quite small, I think. They think it was also an interstellar object. So that's 3 since 2000 and I think it was 2017, isn't it? Oumuamua's discovery.
Yeah,
So,
I think so.
yeah. So if you think about it, so the funny thing about these kind of new areas of science is once the door opened, right, and they start looking for the thing, they find the thing, right? They realize the thing was already there and there was loads of them. And that's the same story with meteorites, because it was only in about 1703, I think, they finally accepted that meteorites were real. Now, that didn't mean there'd been no meteorites before that, of course. There'd been thousands and thousands of them, but they didn't accept it. And that was when science finally moved forward and said, okay, yeah, metal and rocks and things can fall from the sky. It's not just an extraordinary paranormal belief. And, you know, a lot of people be surprised that it took science that long to accept something so obvious. But that's really what happened. And then after that, of course, the door opened and then they were exploring all these meteor sites and watching for asteroids, and the science changed, right? That's what we're seeing here with interstellar objects. The science has changed. The door is open. The windows have been cast open and they're looking out there for these interstellar objects. But of course, you should expect to find that there have been hundreds or thousands of them that have passed through our solar system since the 4.5 billion year old, origins of Earth. Okay. And some of those you would have expected to impact or break up in the atmosphere, right? So we should expect this. We should be absolutely expecting evidence of interstellar objects in the prehistoric records.
Well, there was, I don't know if it has any similarity to these particular tektites, but I remember it wasn't even that long ago, I think, that they confirmed it, that Tutankhamun's dagger was made out of this meteorite black glass type of material. So I'm not sure if that has any similarities with these particular tektites, but potentially.
Yeah, one of the overlaps there is that it seems that humans have had a strange relationship with meteorite materials and tektites, because we have utilized them for valued relics, weapons. And if you look at like moldavite has been one of the early finds, actually, was if people are familiar with it's a German goddess representation. I think it's about 30,000, 40,000 years old. It's the Venus of something, right? And it's quite an iconic image. Anyway, but alongside this statuette, we found some moldavite blades. Now, those have since gone missing, unfortunately, but it shows that even 30,000, 40,000 years ago, we were drawn to these materials, and again, there's been some evidence that go much further than that perhaps very early humans would pick up like australites and other tektites and carry them around. And they're sometimes found near like human habitation sites and stuff. And of course, meteoric iron was used. It was smelted and used in some objects like these possibly ceremonial daggers and stuff. So I think that humans have had a fascination with these materials from the sky going way back.
If you saw these things coming down from the sky in an early period of human history, it'd be quite easy to surmise that these were gifts from the gods, and they would be treasured and made into artifacts. So that makes sense.
Absolutely. And with the look of these tektite buttons, you could imagine someone picking one up and thinking, someone made this, right? Because it doesn't look natural. It looks like it's been sculpted. And of course, without a frame of reference, and if you found them scattered around, you may well think, well, they've been gifted to you from some deity or some supernormal source, or even aliens, because they just have that look of being manufactured. So there is definitely some overlaps there, and I think throughout history we see this kind of relationship. But I think that we're finally at a point where the scientists are actively looking for these. So, well, how would you look for interstellar objects? Apart from looking out there into space, if you're going to look for ones in our solar system, or in particular, those that have visited our planet or impacted, might you not look for some strange, rare phenomena that has not been resolved, despite 200 and something years of scientific investigation, that now as you open the box and say, interstellar objects visit Earth, what might we look for? You would look for your box of persisting anomalies in the geological records associated with cosmic objects. And what do you see straight away? You see 4 tektite strewn fields that in the whole 4.5 billion years history that stand out. So you only have 4 of these, all that time, and yet hundreds and hundreds of impacts with normal impact blasts. So straight away you think, well, there's something strange happening here. Let's revisit. And once you revisit, you come to this kind of, well, I would suggest you should come to this conclusion that all of them are most likely interstellar objects, not just the Australasian tektite strewn field, which is my entry point and is the one with the most evidence because it's the youngest, right? But all of them are extraordinary. Again, in all of the cases, although it's been argued, say like moldavite, that is supposed to be associated with the Reese crater, right? It's not found in the crater, right? It's found hundreds of kilometers away. And this is the same for all of the tectonic stream fields. They're not found in the crater, right? They've looked for a crater that they think could be responsible, and that maybe material was launched out at a kind of steep angle and traveled far away and then landed. That's why I say distal ejector, the furthest flying ejector. So you don't get that hand in glove conclusion where you say, well, I found it in the crater and it's made of the crater rock. It's not made of the crater rock. It's not the same as the crater rock, right? So there's a problem there. And again, what I think has happened here is that all of these are most likely aerial burst explosions, right? And that's because the reason we don't see that as obviously with some of the other tektite stream fields is because they're very old. And so the weathering on moldavite, for example, if you'd had some of these buttons, that's weathered away. So the obvious aerodynamic shaping is gone. It's just too long of, rain and processes and stuff. So that it doesn't mean that they weren't there. It just means that we can't see it because they're too old. So the Australasian tektite stream field, we are fortunate in having these button tektites that still persist across southern Australia and parts of Java. Most of the stream field is what's called splash forms, where you'd see teardrop shapes, dumbbells, spheres, discs, and other shapes that are associated with having formed in the air, within the atmosphere, right? So I should just quickly text that. Why is that? Well, because if you have large chunks coming in from a parent body, some of these chunks explode in the upper atmosphere in large aerial bursts, which are like nuclear explosions. Some of that glass spins off. So you get these little balls, but they're spinning and rotating. And so all of these are rotated forms of a liquid, traveling through air and rotating. But they're all formed in air because the larger chunk has already breached the atmosphere, and then it throws off this molten glass as it explodes. Up in Laos, you have Muong Nong tektite, which is a large kind of layered fields of tektites, which are formed from the explosions in the air, melting the surface rock in you can imagine a column of fire and chaos, and pulling up material and mixing and melting material. So you end up almost like a kind of lake of burnt surface that's molten glass. And so we find folding and twisting of glass there. And this Muong Nong tektite is a very strong kind of hand in glove signature of an aerial burst. That's exactly what you would expect. And in fact, just this year, a paper has come out about aerial bursts over in the Atacama Desert, which they concluded the glass strewn across the desert was formed by a fragmenting comet with aerial bursts melting the surface, and that they see this layering and twisting of the material, which is exactly what we see in the Muong Nong tektites from the Australasian stream field. So this is the result of these aerial bursts. And so we see again exactly this matching morphological signature of an aerial burst in both places, right? So some of these came down to the lower atmosphere, and that's where you get this Muong Nong material because it's melted the surface when it exploded. Some of them exploded in the upper atmosphere and threw out additional debris, and that's these splash forms. And the other part is the tektite buttons, which came in from space. And again, if you think about this, you've got a decaying orbital path, object broken up, chunks coming in, smaller pieces of debris coming in, and eventually at the end of the field, potentially a very large chunk that's gone into the ice. So you can almost in your mind, I was thinking, I'd love a CGI guide to do this, but you can always imagine the thing exploding over this crystal moon, call it, exploding high above Indochina as it's coming along this southerly orbital path, and now fragments and pieces on this decaying path are hitting, and that's where you can see this whole field dragging along across this vast area as chunks breach atmosphere, and then other small pieces raining in, and then really big pieces coming down. And so it's absolutely what you'd expect from an object that's exploded up above Indochina, that it's going to fragment in a complex way. So you're going to get some large pieces and some molten glass. You're going to get a combination. This is exactly what we'd expect to see. And so then once you get to that, then you have to ask that question though, isn't it? What the hell is a crystal moon? What is this glass moon? What process could form that?
Have we ever seen any sort of evidence of other glass style moons or large spherical objects in space, or is this
No.
numero uno?
That would be numero uno. Yeah, there's nothing out there that we know of like that. And again, in the past, people had suggested, could it be a glassy asteroid? You know, because for some of the same reasons that, like, well, how do you get this fining process to happen? You know, it sounds like the object is already made of a glassy material. And so the only thing I've seen that one scientist suggested was maybe that there was some kind of an exploded planet where a kind of quartz rich part of the planet had been melted to a glass, and then this glassy object had traveled through space and arrived here. Now that could make some sense, but then if you loop back around to what I said before about the problems with the cosmic ray data, well then where did that happen? Because unless that planet conveniently exploded very near the Earth, right, and the material went directly towards us, and none of it has become asteroids that we could detect, right, then you're back to that same problem, that sounds like something that would have had to have happened outside of our solar system. And then you'd see, you know, some evidence that this was from, you know, an exploded planet or something. It's just, yeah, it starts getting to that complexity of, well, how does that make sense? And we know of the planets, we know there were exploded planets in our solar system. We know there were stuff like that, but we don't find any chunks like that flying around in our solar system. But we do find chunks from these exploded planets and from, you know, the early formation of the solar system. You know, most of the asteroids and things out there and comets, right, are from that period, the formation of the planets. Some of them are believed to be from, you know, early planets that broke apart, right? So if there was one of these glassy asteroids flying around, there should be more, right? Where are they? Why do we never find any of them? We've only have the indications of one ever. So that's massively problematic. So we should be seeing that, right? So that's definitely an issue. So look, if they tomorrow they detect a glass asteroid flying around out there, well, okay, I'd say, okay, maybe the only interpretation you're left with is that this is not a solar system object, firstly. And secondly, it's so strange, and what it's doing so extraordinary, like entering our atmosphere or entering orbit, which is unlikely because of its size, right? Usually Earth captures very small objects like bus-sized asteroids that orbit for a while, and then they're usually pulled away by the sun, right? We have these short-lived micro moons. We have no evidence of anything particularly large ever being captured, and there's a lot of physics problems with that. You would expect it to actually coming in very fast, either to be accelerated past Earth or pulled in and whack us, right? That when you start talking about these very large objects like comets and stuff, they don't get captured by the Earth. They either accelerate past us or they hit. So this in itself would be, again, another extraordinary event. The idea that a natural, enormous moon was flying along through the cosmos, and we luckily, somehow it came to Earth, and somehow, by all the mathematical odds against it, is captured by our gravity, and it's made of glass, and then, of course, explodes. And that, again, is problematic. Why does it now explode? What kind of natural objects explode in orbit? You know, there's a real glaring anomaly there because it's superheated and to liquid glass in space.
So I might be jumping the gun a little bit because I know you've probably got a few more slides, but you've pointed out some pretty interesting anomalies. But what is it exactly, or what kind of series of highlights do you feel lend credence towards the idea that this could be an actual techno-signature, an alien techno-signature?
Well, in particular, the fact that we are dealing with an object made primarily of silica, because that stands out straight away. Because if you look into the kind of the cutting edge science around what do we expect aliens to kind of look like and what technologies would they have, one of them is the Bracewell probe kind of hypothesis, the idea that they would probably build artificial intelligence, you know, crafts and probes that they can use to explore the cosmos, which are almost eternal. You know, they're not going to have the problem that we have of, you know, a short lifespan, that you can send out an AI probe that is able to explore for millions of years. And if it has a kind of level of self-aware or hard AI, it's almost is like a being. It's a being that's out on its own exploration that can go out, travel the entire cosmos at sublight speeds. So you don't hit that problem where people start saying about, why would aliens come here if they can't travel the speed of light and these extraordinary distances? Doesn't matter to a probe, right? Does it? That can just be traveling along, let's say half the speed of light. You can fill the Milky Way with these things within about 1 million years.
Well, I mean, we've got Voyager out there doing its thing. I mean, it's not unreasonable to imagine probes are out there.
No, we're already looking at doing the Starshot project. We're going to, accelerate light sails to close to the speed of light, right? So it makes a lot of sense that, an intelligent species will use probes. And then once you get to a certain level, you will install or already looking to install artificial intelligence on micro probes and stuff right at the moment. So if you imagine us in 1,000 years, I'm sure that we will have put out fleets, if we survive that long, I'm sure that we would have had fleets of these probes, right? It's just you can see the direction of our technology. It's a logical direction towards sending out robots, AIs, exploring the cosmos, right? So if someone else has already done that, one of the things we might look for, and again, there's an excellent paper called Alien Minds that I suggest that people might want to have a look at, where it tackles the idea that you could build large silica networks, like giant silica networks, moon-sized, and they talk about this, moon-sized, that would be like cosmic super intelligences. So you've got the whole thing, this whole silica body is like a giant living brain.
Who authored Alien Minds?
Susan Snyder.
I'll make sure that's in the description box for everyone listening. You can get
she's kind of an expert on AI and on the direction of transhumanism, cybernetics, and all these topics. But so she's kind of deep dived this and talks a bit about Bracewell probes and also about these cosmic intelligences and the expectation that we're going to see not biological aliens, but our first encounters will almost certainly be with technologies and with most likely artificial intelligent technologies. And so there was a guy called Ronald Bracewell, and he came up with the idea of Bracewell probes, that you'd send out fleets of these exploring devices as a part of a SETI program, and that they would go planet to planet. You send out loads of them, exploring, looking for interesting planets. And Earth is interesting. Why is Earth interesting? Earth's interesting because from 2 billion years ago, you could see the oxygen signature of Earth, right? So it was already of interest. If you were mapping the cosmos, even with fairly conventional means as an intelligence, you would see Earth's oxygen signature and say, ooh, could have a biosphere there, right? And that's when people, another of these arguments you hear from scientists, that why would aliens come to it? Oh, there's nothing interesting. Why would they turn up all of a sudden from space here? And isn't it convenient that it's just when we have our own space program that now people are saying they're seeing crafts in the sky, and oh, what's the chances of that? Well, hang on a minute. Earth has been visible for 2 billion years. What's the chances of visiting in 2 billion years? I would say pretty damn good. If anyone's out there, it's pretty damn good. That's plenty of time to send fleets of craft from multiple solar systems out there with different intelligences on them.
Also, the fact that we ourselves as humans are extremely interested in finding life on other planets and are trying to map our own environment and look for habitable planets and super habitable planets. So even though we're not at the level of sophistication to travel between star systems, we're already obsessively trying to find life in the universe. So, I mean, that argument of why would they pay any interest to planet Earth, just as you said, really kind of falls short of a good explanation, because of course they'd find interest,
Oh, absolutely, because what have we noticed? As we look out into the cosmos with our technologies, we have found that all of the worlds so far are barren, right? Barren rocks, loads of them, So the idea that aliens wouldn't find the oxygen signature of Earth interesting seems to me really incredulous, really stretching to absurdity, the idea, because like you say, we are looking for those very kinds of atmospheric signatures ourselves. And so any civilizations that detected that have had 2 billion years to send probes. So we could have been visited many, many times. And there's another little issue I'll tackle as well, because these are relevant to some of the current things with NASA's diving into technosignatures and UFOs. And there's another issue to this as well. So people say, oh, these are vast distances. Well, okay, first of all, as we've already said, Probes could do those distances, no problem. But that is not just probes. Also, stars are constantly moving relative to each other. There's like a cosmic dance, right? And every now and again, a star will pass very close to our Sol, right? So 70,000 years ago, a star passed through the Oort cloud. Now, if you imagine that that star had a planet and that planet had a civilization on it, they could come here with even conventional technologies. You know, they could send a probe across, you know, why not? It's nearby, right? And that happens, you know, that's been continually happening over the billions of years. Many stars have passed within, you know, a light year travel, or, you know, to Earth. So again, these cosmic distances are only, you know, now as we see them, not necessarily as a million years ago, or as 10 million years ago, or a billion years ago, that a civilization, it could have just naturally passed by its star, traveling, you know, as a starship through space, and detected that oxygen signature and hopped across. Maybe you've had a civilization, you know, here on the moon, or, and then they've left, you know, their star has passed on, that civilization has crumbled. You know, these are not just sci-fi concepts. When you start to understand the science behind these, that, you know, again, with the movement of stars, with the permeability and the long-lived life of probes, with the oxygen signature visible 2 billion years, most of these arguments that are being used to poo-poo and dismiss alien visitation crumble to dust. And to me, suggest some of these people have a poor understanding of their own field, quite frankly, because it's quite absurd to see astrobiologists and cosmologists and astronomers making those weak arguments when they have other people in their own fields telling them, well, no, this is absurd. Look, you know, this is how it actually works.
Yeah, I think we're at a pivotal moment of the status quo shifting within academia and science on these types of issues. So having a proposal like this is certainly pushing that forward. Is there more of these slides to go, or are we?
The one I've got on the screen, actually, I should briefly mention it. This is noting that at the same time, around the same time as this fragmenting object, the Earth was actually impacted by a number of meteors. Right, and this is, again, interesting, not because we've already tackled that, you know, clearly there was something extraordinary happening, but there's other things going on. There are a number of meteors that hit Earth, and they're all dated to about 780,000 years ago. Now, these are not from this same object. So people are saying, well, is this, you know, one object or a moon or a natural object, whatever it is, breaking up? No, because it turns out that the discovery sites all have differing chemical components. So they're saying that these are distinct asteroids that are impacting in Central America, Tasmania, down in Asia, but all dated to around that same period again, around about 780,000 years ago, which, if you think about it, this is extraordinary. So now you've got a multi-directional asteroid storm that's happening around the same time that we've got this strange moon object breaking up in orbit, and that these are all of different composition. So they're coming in from different sides from space. Isn't that kind of weird? And this was just discovered in 2016, so it's a fairly recent discovery. Now, from the same data, you know, the same dating that we've got this giant hole in Antarctica, this strange moon. So it turns out that there's yet another oddity. It was around about the same time, again, you can see here that 780,000-ish years ago, that the Earth's magnetic field shifted. And this is the last time we had a full magnetic reversal, right? Again, on that same dating. So we've got now a series of really, really major, extraordinary things going on here. And I'm quite suspicious about that multi-directional impact as well, because if that is just natural, well, it's very odd in itself, because we expect to see that kind of thing happen maybe in the late heavy bombardment, really early periods of the solar system. But we don't see suddenly asteroids coming from different directions and just pulverizing the planet, right? Is that natural? I have a big question mark over that people should ask. Is that natural? Is something else happening here that's being engineered by said crystal moon, right? Because this is not normal, right? A multi-directional asteroid event is not normal. You can go through our history, and that's only recently being detected.
And by multi-directional, you literally mean obviously different directions of space, different comets and asteroids coming from different areas.
Yeah,
so
at the same time.
We don't have evidence of that really occurring other than this event.
No. And then at the same time as very close in time. Again, when you go with geological time, it's very hard to pinpoint date and say, it happened on Tuesday the 15th.
Yeah.
That's not the right. But in that time frame of the round 780 to 790,000 years ago, all these events are going on, right? So in other words, they can be happening within a few years.
It's a pretty intense time to be chilling on planet Earth.
It sure is. It sure is. And they think that probably one of these impacts, or maybe the whole smorgasbord of impacts, are involved in this magnetic shift, that they are probably the cause of the destabilization of the magnetic field. And as that magnetic field destabilizes, it will allow more cosmic rays in as well. So that's going to have impacts on life. I mean, I've seen some theories that could have some mutagenic effects. We don't really know how profound it is, but we would certainly expect there to be, there's cosmic rays and solar rays are going much lower down into the atmosphere than they normally would. So this is having an effect. Now, if you infer the possibility there's a giant super intelligence floating around the planet, again, if you accept some of my earlier arguments, what is this up to? It starts to sound almost like a bit like a possibly some sort of terraforming event or something like that, the planet's getting pulverized, there's a magnetic shift going on. And then it just so happens that around that same time that you have this kind of the divergence events for humans, right? So somewhere in that, if you look at this tangled family tree, we have the super archaic hominins, and then this period in which the lineages of the archaics begin to diverge. And that is, so around the 765,000-ish years ago, actually now it's, most would say between 750 and 800,000 years ago, seems to be generally accepted. You have a series of changes at the genomic level that are going on in human beings, right? That lead to this split where you get kind of the Denisovans, the Neanderthals, and what will become modern humans, right? Emerging from Homo erectus and other hominins, on the planet. So it seems that funnily timed with this, with all of this stuff going on, funnily timed with this is genomic changes in hominins that will lead to the large-brained humans, the various kinds, Denisovans, Neanderthals, and us.
I can see why your comparison to 2001: Space Odyssey is quite interesting.
Mm-hmm.
The black glass obelisk that unlocks intelligence within humanity, and the same, almost quite similar event taking place.
Yep.
That's very strange.
It's mind-bending. It's absolutely mind-bending. So you look at it and you think, well, so we now have these, as you say, we start out with that encounter. They walk into that clearing and they see the cosmic, black glass objects there, which I hypothesize are remnants of an artificial intelligence, a kind of Bracewell probe. And it's important to note here that the obelisks in 2001 are Bracewell probes. They're what's called Bracewell Sentinel probes, right? Which is a class of Bracewell probe which is left sitting on a planetary surface. Again, hypothetical objects, but they'll be left sitting on a planetary surface to record the kind of the changes in a biosphere. Once you've detected an interesting planet, you leave one of these things to record, monitor, and then potentially make contact. So you leave it to do that. And that's what you see depicted in 2001: Space Odyssey, is the Sentinel probe makes contact by its interaction with those early hominins and changes the course of human evolution. Well, what is going on here? Because it's looking awfully similar to me, because now we have this sudden shift from Homo erectus, who's been pretty stable for like 1 million years, right? Not much is going on with Homo erectus. He's probably stumbled on fire. He's got his stone axes. He doesn't really do a lot. There's no great innovations for about 1 million years. And then all of a sudden we have this split underway. And we know that about 780,000 years ago, there is a sudden acceleration in the cranial capacity of these humans, which has always been considered anomalous, right? But before genomics, all we can see is this fossil record. So they knew the skull kind of size rapidly accelerated, right? But nobody knew why. And there'd been kind of, theories that was it because we started to cook with fire and we had more energy. And I've seen people say, was it we ate magic mushrooms? And, people come with all sorts of things. But we now know from genomics that there are a range of changes that are associated with the differentiation of Homo sapiens. And I include Denisovans and Neanderthals and us all under Homo sapiens, right? At this point, I mean, it'd be very hard for him to argue that they weren't sapiens, because they did all the things we could do, right? They art, technologies, sailing, all sorts of things we now know they did. So really, these are all subspecies of Homo sapiens. We have Homo sapiens denisovan, Homo sapiens neanderthalensis, Homo sapiens modernus, if you like. So we are all coming out of that event and splitting further into these subcategories, but all large-brained, all capable of doing these things, and all interbreeding, quite perfectly capable of interbreeding. We're not separate species in the meaning of species as we always used to use it, because we could mate and have offspring that could also reproduce. And we did, that's proven now. We know that we carry DNA from Neanderthals, and some people carry DNA from Denisovans, multiple kinds of Denisovans amongst Papuans and other Aboriginal people in Australia, up to 3 different kinds of Denisovans. And really with Neanderthals, there's probably at least a couple of kinds of Neanderthal in there as well. So because some of these groups had also differentiated because they lived isolated, went through their own changes, and then bred again. So you've got multiple kinds of hominins included in modern humans, but really we're a hybrid of all of these competing like lineages who eventually came back together. So you can imagine we had a split around that time early on. For a long time, groups were isolated, maybe they bred sometimes, and they went off again. And then something happens where really they come back together, and there's an eradication of all of these other groups. And all that's left is us, I suppose you could say the crowning result from this possible experiment or from this series of strange events. It looks kind of crazy the way that we've ended up, but it's quite extraordinary. Again, if you were to see this from the perspective as a possible experiment, because the very start of this lineage, we have, well, one of the genetic changes that I find particularly intriguing is the chromosome 2 fusion event. So this is for anyone's interested in the background here. These are just the other strewn fields. So you've got Chesapeake Bay, you've got Ivory Coast Tektites, and you've got the Moldavites, and of course the Australasian Tektites. So just an idea. And obviously you can see the difference in sizes here and how the Australasian strewn field is just absolutely vast, absolutely massive. But they're all significant. Let's move on. So I'll probably skip those because we've kind of tackled those, I think. But yeah, so essentially there is a bigger picture story here in that, it just happens that all of these changes are going on at this time, 788,000 years ago. One of them, chromosome 2 fusion event, is particularly intriguing because you've got this change that occurs where in all predecessor hominins, there are 48 chromosomes, right? And then in all of the highly intelligent humans, the large-brained humans, Neanderthals, Denisovans, and us, we all have 46 chromosomes, right? So there is some kind of fusion event. That's where we see 2 of these chromosomes have fused end to end, and this gives us chromosome 2, which is the extended length chromosome. They can see where the telomeres that once were at the end have now fused and have become part of a single chromosome. Right now, that is dated to around about the 800,000 years ago, and that's been fairly recently dated. There's a British biologist, not got the name to mind, but he was looking at when could we pinpoint down when this fusion occurred. They knew it happened before the divergence of Neanderthals and Denisovans because they also carry this, and so they knew that it has to be related to that. And then they wanted to find out, was it as far back as the divergence with other primates, like chimpanzees, right? So he did it, well, I don't understand the sciences, but he looked at it from a complex kind of chemistry perspective and kind of concluded that it happened somewhere around about 750,000 years ago or so. So in other words, we're back at that same point again, where the divergence of these hominins is happening in that 750 to 800,000 years ago, in the middle of which is sort of the 780. And so they have these changes. And now, why is that particularly important? Well, if you look at some of the arguments from the creationists, and here I mean sort of the Christian creationists, like who, there's a lot of scientists in the kind of creationist movement who argue that, God kind of did something spectacular and has kind of created modern humans as distinct from all other types. And so they say, well, one of the signatures of this is going to be this chromosome fusion event, because they think that that has got particular extraordinary characteristics, such as the fact that usually a chromosome fusion is problematic. So you'd have some kind of issues that were quite negative associated with it, right? Which is normal. So technically you'd have either a problem, or they're neutral at best and don't cause you a problem. But they then, if you are able to reproduce, if there's not a severe problem and you are able to reproduce, those changes are lost, because then they go back into the background population. So you'd have one mutation, and that mutation vanishes again because it's of no benefit. It's usually, as I say, usually negative or neutral. So it vanishes into a background of a massive population who has 48 chromosomes, right? That's just what happens. We know that still happens today. We still have these kind of, specific mutations. They come, they go. But what we see instead is a total replacement. All the humans alive now have 46 chromosomes. Like, what happened? Because everyone had 48 chromosomes, and now they all have 46. So something spectacular occurs here, and that's and one of the implications of this are that it has to have happened, first of all, in a number of individuals at the same time, that these individuals are in an isolated interbreeding group, and the changes associated with diffusion are so beneficial, they allow that group to outcompete all others, right? You start thinking about, what does that sound like? Sounds almost like the lab, right? Because where do you an isolated group, all of a sudden, several of the beings have a fused, a fused chromosome. They're only interbreeding with each other, and it's amazingly beneficial. It's almost like someone's playing God, but not necessarily God, right? So that's really intriguing. And also, we know today that with like CRISPR technologies and stuff, right? And we're getting beyond those. We're getting to some more extraordinary technologies that you can, of course, you can go in and start modifying children. You can modify the fetus, right? We're talking about these designer babies and stuff, right? But also you can do what's called, you can create gene drives, right? Genetic gene drive technologies. And people aren't familiar with that. I mean, Bill Gates has been working on gene drives for mosquitoes, and that you can modify the mosquitoes in such a way that, say, the females are all modified, that when they breed, instead of getting one packet of information from the father and one from the mother, it gets two packets are given to the child from the same modified parent. Boom, right? So you get a copy of the original, no matter which one they breed with, you get a copy of one of these modified individuals. Now that's kind of funny, because then if you're that would lead to a total replacement of a population if you use gene drive technologies or an equivalent, right? So if you know what you're doing, you can ensure that when they go forth and multiply, that all of the resulting offspring will have certain modifications that have been put into those individuals, and those will then spread throughout the human population, leading to what we see, this total replacement and an apparent some kind of upgrade. Because we see in this chromosome 2 fusion evidence that it affected the brain, the reproductive system, and the immune system. And there's indications of deletions and additions at the fusion site. So information that you could say looked like it had been kind of tampered with at the fusion site, right? And alongside that, there's around the same time, it's dating some of the anomalies is difficult, but around the same time, again, we can know from the skull changes, the physical changes. We know that something is happening at around this 780,000 years ago. So we already knew that. So although it's difficult to date some of these changes, we know that they have to be happening around that time because we see the change. We see the physical change. So we know that there are genes. There's one that is described as having appeared fully formed from non-coding DNA, i.e. junk DNA, which is crucial to the human brain, crucial to our modern brain. It appears fully formed from the non-coding DNA. Well, that's weird. There's another one that is described as appearing to be a snippet from a longer gene that's almost like it's Xeroxed and put back in, almost like, or is, and so you start seeing these descriptions from these scientists that sound like they're on the edges of thinking some of this stuff. But they're not going to come out and say, looks like someone was playing God here,
Yeah, but we are getting closer to it. I mean, like, there are, especially within, the UFO community and kind of reaching out into the intelligence community, there are people who have been in high levels of authority who truly do believe that there is a likelihood that we have been genetically
Mm-hmm.
modified at some point in our early hominid history. And you look
Mm-hmm.
at the religious kind of infrastructures around creation mythos, and all of these can be fractured interpretations of something a little bit more direct. And obviously, we over the thousands of years,
Mm-hmm.
myth becomes legend, becomes fable. It kind of starts to kind of dissipate, and the intricate knowledge is maybe lost. But we still have these fractured stories of gods from the sky, things coming down and gifting us with the ability to speak. The Sumerian myth of creation is very much akin to that. And so I feel like there is a genuine level of evidence to suggest that there is some manipulation in the human genome from something else. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
even the fact that a lot of cultures celebrated kind of body manipulation of creating longer necks and larger heads. Why were they doing this? What exactly were they deifying and trying to copy and represent? And so
Mm-hmm.
I feel that there is historic fractures of historical evidence around. And then obviously with the chromosomes, this is another significant highlight of, something very novel happened to us, and it increased our cerebral activity in such a short period of evolutionary time that it has to be considered a complete anomaly.
Absolutely, yeah. And there's some others that go with it. And there's one example I always like to use. There's a class of changes that occurred in us called the human accelerated regions, right? And these are areas of code which have gone through what seems to be a rapidly accelerated evolutionary process. Now, I should backtrack a little bit, because if you look into the field of, of is there a possibility that aliens came here, and how might we detect them? Like, one of those is the idea of genetic tampering, right? Not just from people like me or that they're on the fringe, but scientists have, claimed scientists have speculated in this area. So they said, well, what would you look for if that were the case? And they said, well, because genes are changing all the time, because over long periods they're changing due to natural selection and other factors that are at play. There's several, not just natural selection, because they are being modified through processes we understand. Any tampering to genes will eventually become almost impossible to spot. So over millions of years, it will become impossible to spot. So, well, where might we see some? So if someone wanted to leave us a message, like a message in a bottle, where would they make these changes? Well, they would have to make them in areas of the non-coding DNA, what used to be called junk DNA, right, which makes up most of the genome. Now, but in areas that are called either highly conserved or super highly conserved areas, right? And that's because these are areas that are almost unchanging, that you can go millions of years and there's a couple of letters of DNA have changed. So there are areas like that in the genome. So if you wanted a message to persist, you would leave it there. Now, the same argument would go for if we were going to look for tampering that wasn't necessarily a message, but just was alien tampering. We would look in those areas. So where are the human accelerated regions? Well, they are also far found in the highly conserved or super highly conserved non-coding DNA. So that's interesting straight away. And it turns out that there are now hundreds of these, but the first one that was detected, known as HAR1, is a strip of code 118 DNA letters long, which is quite short. Certainly in terms of, you're talking about genes, it'd be very short. And they compared this segment between chickens, chimpanzees, and human beings. Now, the chicken and the chimpanzee have had 300 million years of separate evolution. In that time, 2 letters had changed. So one change successful every 150 million years. I'd call that pretty stable, So it's doing something important. If it changes, the organism dies, most likely, right? It doesn't reproduce. So it's very rare for a natural event in the change in the genome to lead to something either neutral or beneficial, and for it to persist. So that's accepted. And so then they compared humans and chimps, expecting to find no change, because of course 7 million years, a blink in the eye compared to the chicken and chimpanzee difference, right? Instead, they found that 18 letters had changed, right? So it's like, what is going on there? And so that was obviously a shock. Then they say the lady who discovered it, she actually is a biostatistician, and if you can look this up, look at HAR1, and you can look up that quote about the chicken and the chimpanzee, right? And so she actually helps design these kind of statistical programs and stuff to work out chances of things happening. So she created a program, and they came to the conclusion that there was essentially a 0% chance of that happening by any understood evolutionary mechanism. And till today, the papers that I've looked at, they still do not understand how these occur, right? So they don't understand how they occur, and they now have hundreds of them. And what do? The ones that they understand, right? Most of them are to do with fetal brain development. Again, are we talking about something random or something hyper-focused on the human brain? Because, if we're talking about random, why aren't they just doing all kinds of things like your bones and, stuff to do with turning on genes and, in your, I don't know, your eyes and, random is random, right? Random is not hyper-focused on that brain that differentiates us from all the other primates, right? And so you've now got two really super weird anomalies. The chromosome 2, which seems to focus do stuff on the brain, right? You've got these HARs that do stuff in the brain, a gene that appears out of nowhere that's to do with our brain, another one that's a segment from another long gene that's to do with our brain, right? And you look across the animal kingdom, and what's weird about us? Oh, let me think. It's that I can think. It's that my brain.
Yeah, it's
right?
the fact that we're communicating through a neural internet network with technology and with thinking and pontificating about it amazes me that there are such tremendous gaps in our knowledge, and yet we're still able to have the courage to dismiss hypotheses like genetic manipulation. It's just really interesting that we've managed to create this stack of kind of infrastructure around what exactly is rational, and yet we have these phenomenal gaps in what exactly created us to become beings that could be rational in the first place. So it's just it's a very interesting anomaly in the human story.
And like you touched on earlier, I mean, we're now starting to see this story being touched on by influencers, scientists, intelligence officials, and people that are sort of coming out of the shadows a bit. And they're also seem to be suggesting that they have seen scientific evidence that humans were manipulated. And we've had some that are saying this very directly, and some that are inferring it, that maybe there's something odd about us, and talking about human types or different kinds of humans. And there's been a gradual creep towards this narrative, I think, and I think you'd agree with that. We're definitely seeing that slowly seems to be becoming the direction of travel for the kind of the UFO aliens kind of mystery. Is it's going towards us, not and that we are odd on our planet because some other intelligence has had a role in making us odd. And whether it's I guess where it gets into a gray area is was that intelligence physical? Is it people say interdimensional, time travelers, space aliens, lost ancient civilizations? And there is a to be honest, there's a difficulty in this of actually sieving out from those the answer, because if you have, let's say, this extraordinary technology, let's say, okay, we've got this odd silica AI type moon thing, so if we accept it's probably some kind of super intelligence, I wouldn't be able to say for certain whether that popped into existence from another dimension, right? Arrived from, the Pleiades, or had been built by some Martian civilization that has long gone extinct, or even a dinosaur, kind of humanoid that has long gone extinct, or, pick your answer, because all we would see is an alien technology, right? This alien to us.
Sorry, Bruce, real quick, mate. Are you banging your mic? I'm getting a lot of
sorry.
Boom, boom, boom.
I think I was tapping the table a bit. Sorry. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? So yeah, it gets difficult to determine anything but it looking like an alien intelligence, right? I don't see how we can really, at this stage, resolve it. And in many ways, perhaps we're wasting our time when we get caught up in those arguments of, is it interterrestrial? Is it interdimensional? Is it time? I just think you'd have to start with saying, have we got evidence of an alien technology or of an alien intelligence, and go from there? Because those other questions, I don't think they're answerable. And even if the beings, let's say we encounter an intelligence and you say, okay, tell us the truth, where were you from? And they say, well, we were from Alpha Centauri. You wouldn't know that, right? That could be their disinformation because they don't want you to know where they're from. So I don't know that you can ever come to, and this is the thing about the mysteries, isn't it? Sometimes there isn't a final answer. There's just a journey that you're on forever. and that, sometimes you can't solve things, or you can just gradually push the mystery back and back. But it's not going to be anytime soon that we're going to be able to absolutely say this was this intelligence and it came from here and it did that and there wasn't any others. There's going to be so many of these kind of side questions, isn't it? Was there just one? Was there many?
Yeah, the specifics are hard to draw down on, but the overall anomaly, I mean, at least for me, the kind of fundamental mystery is humans ourselves, because everything else on this planet is in this million to billion year crawl through evolution. And here we are, this one species out of everything else on this planet that is in this hyper accelerated, multifaceted, evolutionary process where we're in this technological developmental frenzy, and we're basically, from an evolutionary perspective, almost like an elastic band, just catapulting ourselves into the cosmos. Like, it's almost like the planet has cached all of its chips into this one species and putting a lot of energy into it. So where has that come from? And when you highlight these things that we've been highlighting and that you've been highlighting throughout this talk, these strange anomalies, these events, these interactions with the human genome that seem to have changed it drastically, like it at least seems plausible that there is some other interacting intelligence that has manipulated this in some way. I mean, it at least seems plausible, because we are this, I mean, say what you want about the state of humanity, but we are essentially a very intelligent species in comparison to of everything else on our planet. We have the ability to self-recognize, be aware, terraform, bring thoughts and kind of physicalize them and turn them into technologies and ideas. So we're these extremely novel creatures on this planet. And I think that it's at least worthy of consideration that there was something that had a hand in that. Absolutely.
Well, you'd think so. And I don't think there should be a fear in academics or in the public in exploring that. And yet the knee-jerk reaction usually from scientists, of course, is poo-poo, nonsense. That's not what happened. There's no aliens. And I've seen, very kind of well-respected scientists who have said, it's absolute rubbish. There was no aliens involved. And you think, if they were to honestly sit and answer this question, how much research did you do before you answered that?
Yeah.
The honest answer would be zero, wouldn't it? In every case.
Yeah, I think the problem is ideological vacuums. We get ourselves stuck into these ideological positions, especially if we're thought leaders in academia and we've already been celebrated and we've got papers published and we're revered. It's ego, it's hubris.
It is, and they dismiss it. And I think it's quite sad, because as we've seen here, there's no reason to dismiss that. One of the guys I like what he has said is Professor Paul Davies. People can look at his work. He's, as he said, for many years, he's very respected. He's an astrobiologist, mathematician, physicist, all kinds of hats that he has. He's also the director of the SETI post detection task force. So there's articles out there saying that if aliens arrive tomorrow, who do we call? Paul Davies, right? Because he's like the guy you go to on the post-detection task force to work out what's happening, what we're going to do next, what is this, right? So very well placed to have opinion on these topics. And he has said things like that. First of all, that he thinks the SETI efforts to look for radio signals is really weak, really kind of bogus, and it's really unlikely, extraordinarily unlikely to bear any fruit, and that is no more sensible or ridiculous than looking for other kinds of technosignatures, like, say, chopped up asteroids, radiation from material that may have been used to as a power source, debris from that, or, as he said, one of his personal ones that he likes, some kind of DNA message in a bottle by looking at organisms on Earth to see if there's been any modification. So this is actually a very sensible kind of area. And, I was fortunate. I managed to get a question put to Seth Shostak, nonetheless, the guy that most people will know as the senior astronomer at the SETI Institute, right? The SETI Institute, and not Foundation, SETI Institute. And through Mick West, the noted skeptic. This is amazing. This is a real result for me, because to get Mick West to ask Seth Shostak, what did he think about the possibility and the idea of a genomic SETI where we would look for evidence of manipulation in the genome? And was that sensible? Was that something we should be doing? Well, I know it's sensible. I know we should be doing it. But I wanted his opinion, because he's years and years of SETI not finding anything and millions of dollars go into it and dismissing all these other possibilities, right? Because just focusing on these radio signals. And he was like, oh, yes, well, yeah, paraphrasing, but he's saying, yeah, and Paul Davies, he's brought this up in the past and said that we should do this. And he says it's, it's sensible and we could be doing it. He said, in fact, it would probably just take a graduate student, a few weeks or something to do this, to go through the existing records and look for it. And I'm thinking, he's there to absolutely right. That's all it would have taken. And are you telling me?
So why haven't you done it?
Why haven't you done it? Why haven't you done it? I mean, these are people who they're so respected that if they called a graduate student and said, I've got a little side project for you, would you do it? You're not telling me they would have hundreds of volunteers.
Leap it, yeah.
Absolutely leap it. That, they say, oh, it's just Paul Davies and I and these esteemed scientists just need some help. It's a few days, go through the papers, look for anomalies. So why do you think really strange?
Why do you think they haven't done that? Is it just incompetence? Is it deliberate? What do you think is the issue with SETI on this type of stuff? Because they are the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, and they have been using the most archaic methods to kind of track that down.
Absolutely. I mean, I have thought on that. I thought, like, is it the closed mind? But when they're saying that themselves, that it makes sense and it's sensible to do it, and it would only take a little bit of time. No real cost.
Well, that's what I mean.
There's a bit in your head, you're like thinking, yeah, I mean, you don't want to go to sort of, I don't know, conspiracy that they don't want to, I don't know, that they don't want to question their model of radio signatures, or is there's something there, a cognitive block to that, no, we can't look for something as close to us as genetics on our planet, or what it is. I mean, I would love to know from them an honest answer, how they can sit there, and say something like that. And even for Paul Davies, who I respect, but for him to have not asked anyone in all these decades, he's been in this topic, not to have said to them, I've got this pet project, I like the idea of a message in a bottle. Could you just look through the biological papers, the genomics, and just see if there's anything weird there?
Well,
why
not?
They've got millions.
Do you think that this is something that might end up being done maybe by NASA, or do you think that this is still kind of a little bit too far out of field?
It's a bit like the interstellar objects thing, isn't it? Now the door has opened. Now they're seeing all these interstellar objects, right? So I guess at some point, some academic, who's well placed, just decides it's time that we scour the records and see. I mean, there have been a couple of guys done. You may remember there was a couple of papers a few years back, the idea of a SETI wow signal in our genome, or a couple of guys from the Genome Project. One of the guys was, I think, maybe both of them. It's featured in Tom DeLonge's book as well. He mentions these guys that I can't remember the name of, but they had two papers. One was like I think this SETI wow signal, and another associated paper where they did look and they felt that they had found evidence. But I mean, those papers are being widely attacked, but at least it shows at least a couple people had tried. That doesn't seem to have opened a door where other people have jumped in. And I find that strange, because again, for someone to sit and say that, we really could just have some graduate students, is it fear of budget being reallocated? Is it just looking silly, the idea that this starts touching on religious kinds of ideas, creation of humans, that maybe there's a fear there that you're delving into a creationist kind of arguments? That may be it, or it's just an idea that hadn't come to its time, or something like that. I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's your guess as good as mine, because I find it really strange, because when the millions of dollars have poured into searching for radio signals without any being found, and with basically almost no chance that they will be found. If people think about the odds, you need to have a civilization somewhere out there in this infinite cosmos that happens to use radio signals like we did at a time that's just right for that radio signal to be reaching us, now that we have the detectors, and going at the right direction, right, to reach us wherever they are. And just at that moment, it's like a needle in a mountain of needles, almost like a cosmos of needles, and you just happening on that one right needle, right? I mean, it's so unlikely as to be absurd. I mean, I don't mean to be mean to SETI researchers, but it goes into almost paranormal chances of them getting this detection, whereas it'd make much more sense to look for like objects. That's why you look at NASA and some of the other organizations now are starting to change their tune, because if you really think about it, and Avi Loeb has kind of touched on this, we're much more likely to have an archaeological kind of discovery where we find something like a remnant of a ship, or we see a large, a very large object orbiting a planet, like, a space station or one of these kind of energy gathering structures, that something like that, or probes, drifting probes going through our solar system, that at least as likely, if not far more likely, than detecting one of these radio signals.
Yeah, I think we're now moving that observational lens further towards home, back onto our own planet and our localized solar system, to see if there's anything more compelling. And to be honest, it seems like that is actually where the more compelling information and evidence of interaction is taking place. So I think that we are genuinely, we're getting towards that point of a critical mass where there is a sea change in how these types of things are addressed. I mean, the Galileo project, the NASA initiative that's coming out now, all of these things are still kind of baby steps for a lot of us who have a little bit more knowledge or background information on this type of issue. And obviously we want to see it being pushed to the absolute extremes of how it could be covered. But in terms of setting the blueprint for an adaptation in models and adaptation in how we look at searches for extraterrestrial intelligence, this is changing, it's shifting, it's evolving, and obviously contributions like what you're doing are just pushing that forward a little bit more. So is there anything else that you want to cover? Do you feel like we've kind of hit every point, or is there anything else you want to bring up before we think of wrapping this up?
I'll bring it towards an end, but I mean, I'd say a couple of points. I mean, I think we look at what's happening with the Galileo project, of course, and with, I say, UAPX, they're doing some interesting things. And of course, with NASA's recent kind of shifts, saying they're going to look at UAP and look for possibly interesting things in the, in the atmosphere. And I assume also in near Earth space. It hasn't really been clarified what they're going to do exactly, because they're at this stage, they're just going to be talking about what they're going to do. So they're going to be 9 months of them talking about what they're going to do. But we assume that they will, at the end of that 9 months, be looking at both in atmosphere and near Earth space, and the moon, I would hope, because again, that's, as Avi Loeb has pointed out, would be a great place to look for crashed objects, because it preserve them perfectly, right? So we would hope that that's what we're going to see there. But between these kind of efforts, we are definitely starting to see an opening of that door to finding these technosignatures. And I think just as when they confirmed that meteorites were real, that then they found, yes, there's been thousands of meteorites, and look, there's everywhere there's meteorites. And now they've gone to the interstellar objects. Oh yes, look, there's 1, 2, 3. That once you open those doors, let's be honest, I think you open that technosignature door, you're going to find them. You're not going to find one. You're going to very quickly find multiple. And so it could be that we start with the signature I've talked about, obviously this Australasian Tektite signature. There's a couple of others out there. I mean, again, I don't want to totally dismiss things that have come before me, because, I mean, obviously Avi Loeb he feels that Oumuamua may have been not only an interstellar object, but a technology. He can never really confirm that, but obviously had indications due to its reflectivity, the way that it accelerated leaving the solar system, the fact that it passed between Earth and Mars on the ecliptic plane, which is really interesting because it just happens to go between the two habitable planets on the ecliptic plane, which is kind of, if you had a probe going through, that's kind of almost where you would target. So there are indications there that it could well have been a technology, and I feel that he's probably on the right track with that. Then also you have people like Professor Wainwright, who's a British astrobiologist, who has found strange forms of what seem to be forms of simple life in the upper atmosphere. But also he had a detector that was high up. I think it was, like, I may have this wrong, about 50 miles up. It was quite high up. And one of the things that had a small metallic sphere impacted into it. And when they recovered this, it sort of broken open. There was a kind of organic goo coming out of it. And he actually, and others, they had this analyzed. It was made of a mixture of, it was titanium and a couple of other very hard metals, right? Good for protection in space. That it resembled an artificial seed for life. You think about it. So if panspermia is real, if there is directed panspermia, like civilizations out there that are sending out the seeds of life, it may literally be that that's what he found, the seed of life.
Wait, is this like is this a confirmed thing that they found?
You can see a picture of it and everything. Yeah, I mean, And he has said he sent all of his work to NASA. He has sent it to universities. He said nobody's interested. They don't reply to him.
Serious?
Seriously,
So no one knows what the actual substance inside is.
No, I think he would have to get much more expensive kinds of testing done to confirm whether there was DNA in it. But he said
Bloody hell, no one's doing nothing about it.
No, and he found multiple what seems to be simple organisms that came in from space, and a weird salt crystal that has what looks like the face of some kind of worm coming out of it. And he said that was just coming into our atmosphere as well. And he says, is it an alien? And he said, but when he sends these things to NASA, again, he's an astrobiologist. It's not. It's
not just some random guy.
Random guy. And, he sends these things to NASA and to other scientists. He said they are not trying to replicate. They are not coming back to him. NASA didn't even answer him, right? They're speaking on the search for life, right? And so he's sending them metal sphere that he's found in the upper atmosphere, a weird kind of creature's face coming out of a salt crystal coming in, stuff like that. And he said he doesn't get a reply. So it's a bit like...
What's his name?
Professor Wainwright, Milton Wainwright.
And is he doing talks? Is he interacting with people?
He may now have retired, but he has been on a couple of shows. Another guy who should look up is Professor Wickram Singer, because Wickram Singer for years and years has been dealing with panspermia and has collaborated with Wainwright, and also has highlighted Wainwright's work, saying, if we don't kind of open our minds to this, we may miss amazing discoveries. But Wickram Singer has had similar problems, that he's had years and years of saying, look, I think there's viruses and bacteria raining in from space, and he's given lots of evidence for that, and it doesn't get traction really. But I think Wainwright's work is more interesting because he's finding what seems to be a metal sphere coming in from space, like a seed of panspermia. So that's not really broken through. And then you have another one I think was interesting was a couple of years back, there was a probe that went past, is it Ceres, the dwarf planet Ceres in the asteroid belt? And they detected, again, people can look this up, they detected in one of the craters on the Ceres, there was some highly kind of reflective, glowing material, right? So the probe got these photos and they said, well, we think it's some kind of highly reflective salts leaching out of the surface, okay? But in one of the images, the shadow is right across the crater and it's still glowing. So to me, that should now be dark, because if it's reflecting light and there's no light, why is it glowing? And then the thing is, it gets weirder, because then when they there was a project to test the use of AI in looking for technosignatures, and they ran the AI over this crater, right, Ceres, and it found a geometric pattern, which is like a circle inside a square, inside a triangle. No way. Right? And they had the AI found it, and they tested this by a group of people who had no special training and anything, just to see what would they say. And they said they could see like a circle and a square and a triangle, right? And that's like an alchemical symbol that we have on Earth. So that's super weird. And that is in the middle of one of the glowing spots, right? Now, let's just say you wanted to leave a message, right? What should we do?
Oh, wow.
When they get, almost like the 2001, when you stand down to the cosmos, they found the obelisk on the moon, right? And that was the next step, that they found the obelisk on Earth. Once we got to the moon, there was another bit of the trail. So they left something on the moon.
Little trail of breadcrumbs.
Then we could go on, right? A trail of breadcrumbs leading out into the solar system. And this pattern of glowing spots actually looks like a map of a solar system. No, it looks like a map of like a star system.
Is there images of this? Can I put
there
this
is
up
images.
In
look for this. Look for
this.
This probe to Ceres and the glowing spot, and so and also the AI test that was done, and so they found what looks like geometry in a glowing spot in this pattern in this crater on this dwarf planet. Where's the follow-up mission then? Where's the follow-up mission? Wouldn't you instead they said
don't need one, mate.
Because the AI must be malfunctioning, they said. So the AI must be it's no good. It's just detecting any old rubbish. So we have problems with the AI. So it couldn't be that we'd found something and maybe we need to dig deeper. It was just poo-pooed away as, well, it can't be, can it? It must be the AI is not working and these people are just seeing things and, move on, business as usual. So that's why I want to credit. I think that there's already other potential technosignatures. There's stuff like Wainwright's work, there's panspermia stuff from Wickram Singer. There's, I think, a good argument.
Be careful with your finger on the desk.
Sorry, again, yeah. Again, there's evidence from Ceres, which I think at least deserves being investigated, right? And Oumuamua, again, as we say, is a possible one. So I don't think that what I'm saying is in isolation. I think we're going to find there's a whole kind of smorgasbord of things that we should be looking closer at, and that these tektites are just one of them. and they're convenient because they're physically there. We don't have to go anywhere. You can get one on eBay, so we're not really like, you don't have to launch a probe or anything, you can just get one, right? So if they are from an interstellar object, that in itself is amazing, right? And if people can go, honestly, people are going to go now, you can get yourself one before they go up in price, if ever this is confirmed, because
I want to grab a little slice for myself.
Yeah, I would, because if it gets confirmed at any point, obviously their value is going to go, I imagine, to extraordinary. I mean, and they're not cheap. Some are quite cheap, but they're not the Australite buttons. I would advise against, unless you're quite wealthy, I'd advise against buying an Australite button.
How much?
They're already like thousands of dollars.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Those are thousands of dollars. If you just get the normal pieces of the Australite Tektite, you can buy a small piece for like $20 or something, $10, $20. Yeah. The buttons are quite rare because they're usually broken up on the way in and stuff. So those I would say not, but you can get the particularly Tektite from Thailand, Laos, Philippines. So those are cheaper than the Australian ones as well. Just anyone who's interested in having some. But I mean, that is there available for people to investigate deeper, particularly if we're saying that, they could potentially be from an alien intelligence. Wouldn't we want to know what an alien AI is made from and why it uses those particular components? Would that maybe tell us something about how to make better AI, large networks ourselves? I would think so. And also, of course, if this is linked to our origins, I would really like to see some geneticists who specifically go in with the view, is there anything in the genome that meshes with our expectations for genetic manipulation? Not just me looking and noticing there's a lot of weird things that I think do that indicate it. The follow-up would be some geneticists saying specifically, right, okay, if aliens modified us, what would we look for? Okay. And that they then go in and look at this. And then they also look at some of these anomalies we already know about and look closer at them. Do they have the hallmarks of manipulation as we understand it? Now, that hasn't been done. I can only go so far. I mean, I don't have a lab. I'm not a geneticist. You know what I mean? I can't do anything further with this. I can only use the papers that are published, right? So I know that there's strange things in those, but I can't go and then do a focused project. The same as with the Tektite. I can only use what's published. And I can't really even go much beyond a tool beyond that, because as soon as you do, people will say you're a pseudoscientist, you're doing pseudoscience. So anything I say, if I was to get one and say, well, I did something with it and I looked at it, and they're not going to take any of that. They'll just say, well, he's not an expert. What is he talking about? Right. So I can only go to that. Now I need people to then come in with the view, if this was AI, why would it be made of this? And does that make sense for an AI? Like why this would make it?
Have you tried to get this in front? I mean, obviously, I'm sure you've sent it off to some people, but have you tried to get it in front of like Avi Loeb or anyone like that?
I've reached out. I did send a couple of emails to the Galileo project. I didn't hear back, and that may be just that I'm lost in the bucket of emails. Yeah, I mean, I can't say. I mean, I assume that they wouldn't have a negative view. I'm always a little bit skeptical of things. I don't know how things work there or their structure, but looking at the people that they've aligned with, I would think that I would expect them to be open to this kind of discussion. I would expect so. So I will try again with that.
Do you have it? Do you have his email? Do you have Avi's email?
I do have, and I will try him again.
All right.
The other, I have got someone else, a distinguished scientist who's kind of associated with the things we're talking about,
right.
Who I won't name, but someone who has agreed to look over my paper. And again, I've written a paper because what people say to you, if it was real, you'd have a paper, or
well, here's my bloody paper.
Yeah, that's right. So you'd have to appear, where's the peer review paper? And all this. So because of that, there's a point where I got tired enough of hearing it, because I don't agree that things only real when you have a paper. I mean, that's absurd.
No,
but I do understand.
It certainly helps in the
it helps, right?
Superficial academic world.
Exactly, and it also leads them to show that what the references are, and that you're not just claiming this stuff. That all the sources are there, the papers that I've read, so they can see the argument, and then they can dispute it by looking at other papers and seeing whether or not they don't agree with me. So I have got that in process for people who wonder. But hopefully I'll get some feedback on that. I have reached out to journalists, quite a few journalists. What I find has happened usually is an expression of interest and then silence.
Just fizzles out.
Just total silence, no reply after that. And
it's quite a dense thing to package into like an article or something like that. Obviously, we've been going for just over 2 hours, and I'm sure you could probably have gone for longer. So definitely not an easy one to compress.
It's not. And I've struggled with that as well. It's like, what do you put in that initial email? Because you can't put, the entire thing. I have attached the paper.
There's nothing worse than clicking an email and just seeing like a 10-page thing. It's like, I don't even want to read that.
No. And I have in a couple of cases, I've agreed to see the paper and I've sent it to them in the draft form, but I don't know whether they looked at that or whether, again, because they're not specialists in it, they might look at it and think, well, I still don't really know whether he's right, or I don't know. It's really hard to say because I don't know what they think. If they don't respond, if they don't tell you, then you don't know what the issue was.
I think if you can get validation from your paper, that would certainly assist you, because it's it's just that kind of stamp of certification that a journalist can say, oh, okay, well, at least he's had a paper kind of peer reviewed or looked at, and all right, let's have a look at this. So I think that, like we were saying, it's not necessarily the be all and end all to prove your theory, but it certainly helps when you're navigating that mainstream academia and journalism and science reporting to have that stamp of authority over it, for sure.
Absolutely. I think even just having it published online as a preprint on one of the preprint servers, because you've probably noticed a lot of the stories now, particularly in these kind of fields, aliens, UFOs, if there is a paper, it's usually a preprint that they've just, the press seems to be quite happy now to just say, well, it's going to be reviewed, but look, here's a preprint, and they just write a story from the preprint. So, I mean, initially I would look to get it probably up on like AOVIX, or it's pronounced one of these popular preprint servers, because to be honest, getting it to, I'm happy for it to go to peer review, but the prejudice against it, I imagine, is going to be very strong. Second to that, I'm not an academic. I had a conversation a while back with a professor of geology in Germany about some other work I was doing, and he sort of said, well, if I aim to publish a slightly controversial hypothesis and I get a collaboration of a list of other, quite respected scientists, I will struggle to have that paper go into review in a leading journal. And so I don't like your chances as an outsider on your own trying to say really controversial. So I understand that. I mean, that people may not really understand that, but yes, that is a problem. It's easy to say to people, where's your peer-reviewed paper? That's very easy to say without a familiarity with how reality works. I don't know if any of those peer reviews would take, let's be honest, I don't know if they take it. And I don't want to just put it into some pay-to-publish journal where it's just me paying just to have the honor of being in some subpar journal.
Paying for your own certificate to put on your wall.
And there's a lot of those predatory journals out there that will do that. So yes, you can get published in a journal, but what does that mean if you sort of just paid to have it reviewed?
No, you want the validation. You want some level of validation, and but this is fascinating, and I think that you've obviously put a lot of groundwork into this. You've put a lot of thought into this, and I wish you the best of luck with this paper, Bruce. I think that you've got a really interesting hypothesis here.
Thank you very much. I mean, I think, as you say, the next step is get the paper published. At the very least, the public then can read it. So whether the journalists or scientists take interest or not, obviously I can't guarantee, but at very least, people that find this interesting can then critique my work, read it for themselves, explore the source papers that I've used, and come to their own decision as to whether or not this is legitimate. And if you find it is, then perhaps for the first time ever, have an objective scientific base to believing that there is an intelligence interacting with our planet, not just subjective, or personal experiences, things people have seen or experienced, but something you could go to a friend and say, hey, I think because of this evidence here that you can look at yourself, that there's an intelligence interacting with us, rather than I had an experience, or I believe it, which is typically where we're at now, right? So my hope is, at the very least, that for many people it offers that in addition to that conversation they've been having, where they've had to previously rely on what's fairly subjective evidence, anecdotal accounts, stories, pictures, stuff that's really difficult to use to convince somebody else that there's an intelligence at work here that's not human. So far, nothing has been concrete that I've seen. I don't know what you feel, but I don't think there's anything out there that's concrete. And I know that some people won't like that, because they'll say, well, about these videos from the Navy and the UFO stuff. But all of it at the moment, I've seen skeptics offering arguments that are at least quite compelling to make you question whether it's conclusive, right? So I'm not saying they've been debunked, but at the same time, they're not so strong.
Fingers on the desk. Fingers on the desk. Sorry, it's really loud.
Okay,
like,
right.
Boom.
Yeah. It's. Do you know what I mean? Though it's we're at that point, aren't we, where it's not strong enough where you can say, yep, this evidence concludes it. And that's what's been the problem.
No, I absolutely agree, mate. I mean, obviously for me, it's one of those things, again, drawing back to subjectivity. I have had my own experiences with things that I feel have satisfied my understanding that there is at least something out there that we're not quite sure what it is. And it seems to be representative of some level of intelligence beyond humans. I've seen something that I find compelling enough to create this platform and do what I'm doing. But in terms of the actual in the field evidence, a lot of it is pretty murky and subjective, and you have to sometimes just rely on the credibility of an individual and how credible you feel they are and how sincere you feel they are. And I think that in terms of subjective evidence, there's a lot of compelling compelling evidence. But I would agree with you in terms of especially for a skeptical, rational, scientific mind who wants to see data, numbers, something that they can kind of physically understand. We're not there yet. And maybe, I mean, I say maybe, to be honest. I think absolutely there is extremely compelling evidence that has not been released, from all of our respective governments, I think, in the Western world, to be honest, especially within the Five Eyes, the UK and the US and others. But I think we're in the process of that. It's just extremely slow, and it's kind of like easing people into the water type of situation. But I do think there's more compelling evidence behind raps. But that's the issue, right? That's kind of like what Eric Weinstein and others are saying. It's like, look, if there really is this compelling information, give it to us. We now are ready to see it. I think people are ready to kind of embrace a more sophisticated level of knowledge around this. So man, I agree with you. It's not exactly highly compelling, but I do know from personal experience, and I think that if you pay attention to the field of research over the decades, it becomes very hard to dismiss every single account and rationalize them under a prosaic explanation.
Well, I mean, without, I know that we've probably gone quite a bit over time, but but one of the things we have to look at, and I think this is, again, key to what we call the greater kind of the UFO and ancient aliens and other kind of mysteries, is that, something strange is happening or has happened and is happening. Now, in a way, I don't think we should get too caught up on whether is it aliens are in the sky, and there's all these spaceships, or is there something about humans that's really radically being misunderstood? Because if millions of people are for some reason projecting or seeing or experiencing contact with aliens, now whether that's in some kind of altered state, like a spontaneous altered state where they drop into some kind of mental space where they see spaceships landing and aliens talking to them, or that they see aliens enter their bedroom and abduct them, like that's a radical rethink of how the hell our brains work, isn't it? And like what's going on in our internal world. The idea that you can just skip over that and say, well, people aren't really experiencing real aliens. Okay, but what the hell is going on? What the
hell are they experiencing?
What exactly, the hell are they experiencing? And that's something I find is it's disturbing, the way that is skipped over as but they can't be real aliens. Yeah, okay, but what's happening to these people? Like, why can't you help them? If it's not that, if there's something really wrong or really horrible happening to some of these people, where's the help? Where's the support? Why is it that they get X-Files music played over them when they're talking about their PTSD-inducing account of where they were, they were driving along and suddenly, some four-armed creature was dragging them out of their car into a ship. Now, whether that physically happened or whether it happened as real as day to them, but not in physical reality, they went through that and they have PTSD. That's, clinically confirmed that most of these people have PTSD. Where is the support? Where's the help? Where's the effort?
Just
make fun of them. And we wouldn't make fun of anyone else. If you had been attacked, assaulted, raped, like we wouldn't be joking about it. But these people have had some of them. I mean, some people say they had nice experiences. Don't get me wrong. I think the majority probably claim they had positive experiences based on I think there's the free research paper. And they found that most people had positive experience. But many of these people, again, if we extrapolate this out to tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people having these experiences, there are thousands and thousands of people who had horrific, horrifying experiences that have left them traumatized with PTSD, often life-ruining Their marriages have dissolved. They've lost their jobs. They've lost their homes. They're maybe out on the street now, right? Because of this experience where they believe, or at least they experienced an entity doing crazy stuff to them, right? So why aren't we looking at that and taking it seriously, and showing compassion?
When it's had that much of an effect on your personal life, how can you really pass that from reality and say that this is
right?
It's, you know,
it's real.
At some level, it's bloody real, mate.
Yeah, at some level, it's
changed
real.
your entire life.
So why aren't we doing science there as well? Why is that getting skipped?
It's the stigma, isn't it? It's, you know, we've been this has been stigmatized for decades, so we're now in that process of trying to remove the layers of laughing at it, and all the TV shows and the films and all of the fantastical type of theatrics that we've put around the UFO issue, the alien issue, the abduction issue. You know, these are all now being addressed gradually, and the stigmas being eroded. So hopefully there will, you know, support networks and types of infrastructures around this might come up in this new era of addressing it. But, you know, we've had decades of people who have gone through really traumatized, even if the experience itself wasn't necessarily a negative experience. It's such a reality breaking experience to suddenly have like beings in your room, or to be driving down the road and suddenly there's a ship over your car. You know, this is just such intense things for people to go through, and for you to not have the ability to speak about it is extremely distressing. I mean, you know, I get emails all the time from people who can't speak to their wife, can't speak to their husband, whatever it is, and they need to talk to someone about their experience. And I think that there are probably a lot more people than we actually know that have gone through things, and they're just keeping it quiet, you know.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I like you, I get, and I'm sure that anyone who has a profile in these topic areas, you get contacted from people, and and you know, these people, a lot of them have been through such mind-bending stuff, and you know, and they may not have talked to anyone ever before they've reached out to you, because they wouldn't know who to talk to. And you know, one of the things I liked actually about Eric von Daniken's work, and if you read one of his books, he talks about his journey. But, you know, back in the day, some of these people, you know, like the Betty and Barney Hill, they spoke with him. The guys from, the two guys that were fishing and that they got abducted. I've forgotten the names now. But there was,
don't know about that one.
Oh, it's a famous case, and they saw lobster clawed kind of beings. But anyway, there was a couple of guys. A lot of these cases, people spoke to him because he was kind of known as the ancient aliens guy. So you can imagine he's one of the first people to have a high profile in the topic. That a lot of these early cases, they actually would reach out to Eric, because it's like they didn't know who to go to. So it's only as they start to find somebody that could listen to them, it's not going to call them mad. That I think that's been a trend. That as soon as you stick your neck up and you're visible in these topics, you'll get a lot of people saying to you, I've had these things happen. And those people are definitely not looking for any fame or fortune or anything. Not that there is any really in these topics anymore, you know, maybe at the beginning, but now you won't get fame and fortune. At most, you'll probably get your local newspaper putting a joke article about you, which makes your situation worse, right? So other than that, you can reach out to someone like us who's got a profile and say, can I tell you about this really weird thing? That I think, like you said, I think there's a lot more people. We may get to the point where it's, I don't know, millions. I don't know. I think maybe millions, especially because it seems that in some cases these are kind of suppressed memories, like trauma is, right? And the other thing with these, when we say the traumatic experiences, when people say that they had a positive encounter, if you actually listen to the encounter, it often doesn't sound positive, and it sounds way more like Stockholm syndrome is happening, right? And that they've now said the aliens are okay, and the aliens meant well. It's like
my friends.
The aliens attacked you, and they sexually assaulted you. They dragged you out of your, you know, and you're like thinking in your head, it doesn't sound positive. And I understand the normalization, because maybe to survive, to live your life, you've managed to put a positive spin on it, and said the aliens probably meant well, and they were just doing their experiment. Because otherwise, how do you cope? You know, with that idea that the threatening other is just waiting, lurking in the darkness constantly for you, right? Well, so I understand that.
It certainly feels like a spectrum. You know, there's people that have gone through what seem like undeniably traumatic experiences, and then there's people, to be honest, like myself, who've gone through experiences that have been, if anything, almost spiritually enlightening, and you know, have put me on a journey of further interest in consciousness and further interest in these subjects. So I mean, it's an interesting dichotomy, really. There's
probably a bit like you. I mean, I've had a mix, you know, but nothing so bad as that, you know, that I guess I couldn't carry on coping with my life. But yeah, I've definitely had problematic experience and positive experiences with, not necessarily with just alien contacts or whatever, but with what we'd call, you know, that spectrum of paranormal and psychical and phenomena, you know, which I think most people that I talked to have had something that's in that range, even if it's just as simple as knowing someone was going to call them, or or a flash of telepathy about someone they knew being hurt. Or I think that stuff is so common.
Oh my God, so
that
common.
Almost anytime you mention to someone that you had a weird experience, they've had a weird experience, they'll share with you. Do you know what I mean? They're just waiting for you to enable that.
To be honest, when I was in Egypt, there was someone that we met on the cruise, and I was chatting to them, and we were talking about exactly this idea of kind of interpreting thoughts and interpreting situations and intuition, and they admitted that they were really worried about how they should be thinking about things, because their ex-boyfriend they had this feeling for ages that their ex-boyfriend was going to break their arm, and then they were going to phone them up about it and tell them that they were broken their arm. And she'd been worrying about this over and over and over, and then it happened like 2 months down the line, and she thought that she'd like created this with her mind. And I was like, to be honest, I think you just interpreted something that was in that kind of quantum stream of information, and you felt it so strongly that you were thinking about it all the time, and then it comes up and you think that you manifest. But this is the way that these things work. It's very strange.
The world is far more strange than we dare to imagine, and I think that's where a lot of this is going, whether it's the research into the psi phenomena, research into alien intelligences or our origins. All of it is kind of telling us that reality is way more strange than we ever imagined. Certainly in the Western kind of paradigm. I mean, if we look to indigenous cultures, shamanic cultures, obviously they already are kind of saying, actually, no, it is super weird. And there's beings, and you can fly out your body. I mean, so there's cultures that already accept all this, but in the kind of the Western paradigm, obviously today, Europe, North America, Canada, Australia, most of Europe, we find that those traditions were kind of mostly eradicated, and we don't have much of a mystery tradition in the West today. So most people are disconnected from that kind of cosmology and that kind of worldview. So we have a problem.
It's coming back though. I think that for me, it's this symbiosis between spirit and science, or rationality and creativity. You can almost look at the fact that we're going through these evolutions in artificial intelligence and technology at the same time as consciousness and psychedelics are being studied, and all these things are kind of coming up together in a way where a shared space between these two almost polar observations of reality are coming together. So the esoteric perspective, the mystic perspective, is now maybe in a position to be rationalized and understood through science, instead of dismissed by science, actually understood and implemented within the models as, oh no, this is just a part of reality. It seemed like magic before, but now we understand maybe on a quantum level why consciousness does this and why this does that. And I think we're getting closer to that point where we diverged from the spirit and from where our ancestors were when we were very connected to nature, very shamanistic, very integrated with our environment. And we obviously split, and then the age of enlightenment, and we became a very materialistic and reductionist society. And I think that we might now be kind of almost like on a bell curve coming back round to that, and that kind of ancestral footprint, but with this technological sophistication and with this kind of scientific lens. So we're now going to rationalize the mysteries through science.
Absolutely. And I think we're going to gradually learn as well that we hear this idea that, if we found evidence of aliens, again, I'm saying we have, but if we did, that'd be the greatest shift for humanity. And I don't really agree. I think the greatest shift for humanity is to do with understanding us, changing the way we behave, recognizing that the hidden kind of abilities and the hidden characteristics of the human being, and maybe of the human soul, if you like, because changing the way that we behave, the way we communicate, you're moving to say, like, what I say, non-violent communication, moving towards compassionate understanding for each other, evolving as a species, that would have a much more profound effect than us finding anything. Just finding an alien spaceship, cool. It's always like, cool, bro. But what's that really do? I think what really would change us is us changing, us changing ourselves together collectively as a species, taking a pause and sort of saying, where are we going? What is it we're doing?
What are we doing?
Where do we want to end up? And why are we treating each other like this? Those things would have a much more profound impact than any of this. And I think sometimes people are hoping that by finding an alien spaceship,
it might trigger that.
It's going to magically fix things, or the aliens are going to swoop in and they're going to tell us what to do. With the cosmic mummy and daddy will come in and fix everything, clean our nappy out. I don't think that that's what's happening or is going to happen.
No.
I think even if there's intelligences interacting, I don't think that's going to happen. I think that this is us reaching a point of near adulthood. At least we're at the point where we should have our initiation experience into adulthood.
Basically, it's a coming of age story.
It is, and that's it as a species. And then we're right down the cusp. And it's do we walk over the fiery coals and trust, and that we go through that initiation into a new era, or we could open door 2. Door 2 doesn't look good, because door 2 is we fall into the abyss of extinction.
It's got a bit of a thermonuclear taste to it, that door 2.
Yeah, there's all sorts of bad stuff. But I mean, when you look at it, the list, we could use the nanotech, the biotech, all of it. There's so many things behind door 2 that if we don't grow up really quite quickly and change the species, we've made a list. Like I said, it's almost as though we wanted to commit suicide, but we wanted to make sure it wouldn't fail. So we've lined up a dozen ways of killing ourselves. So that, what I mean, if the first one doesn't work, well, the nanobots or the biotech or this will do it. Right. So we've done so many that it's like we either grow up now and we fix everything, or we are absolutely in dire water. Yeah,
and maybe this is not the first time we've come to this point in the human story of
possibly
development and making a decision of where we go. Shall we wrap up here?
Yeah, I'll wrap up, because I think we've gone on to the 2.5 hours. I think that's plenty of food for thought, I would hope, for everyone. I'll only end by saying, if anyone's particularly got questions or queries or criticisms, I'm easy to reach via Twitter. It's probably the best place. At geological SETI is the handle for my account. Also, I mean, you can find me via Facebook. I don't use it very much. And my email, if you have something particularly kind of important to say, is bruce@brucefenton.info. So again, if scientists or journalists, particularly if they want a query or something like that, they can contact me. I'm not adverse to criticisms or people requesting some evidence. I'm not scared of that. In fact, I relish having a debate with someone who is in the Tektite field. So yeah, hopefully that's interesting people. There's a couple of books, as I say, on Amazon if people want to read my older books. Both The Forgotten Exodus and Exogenesis are on Amazon, or they can contact me and I can arrange something through eBay instead if they want to get a signed copy, any of those things. But yeah, I think we're in exciting times and I look forward to it. And I particularly look forward to seeing if NASA will revisit their own papers on Tektites and see whether, because I think that they have the evidence for techno-signature there in their own archives.
Well, it would certainly be interesting if they dug that up. So let's see what happens. And for everyone listening, you can check the description box below for links to Bruce's social media and his work, his books, etc. Comment below. Let us know what you think. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, hit the notification bell. And if you want to support Project Unity and gain access to a fast-growing social hub for researchers, experiencers, and just generally curious minds, you can sign up to our Patreon and gain access to the Unity Community Discord server. Your support helps keep the wheels turning, and it allows me to devote more of my time to securing interviews with guests like Bruce. So thank you so much for coming on, man. It's been really, really great.